Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It starts in a dark bedroom. I'm asleep and I'm awake. My eyes are open and I cannot move. My heart races and my mind shudders, but my body remains still. I'm staring at something that I know is not there. I almost can't see it in the inky dark of the late night, but I can feel its non-existent weight resting on the end of my bed. I can make out its vague shape outlined against the wall. A person, shrouded like a silhouette, sits on the edge of my bed, nearly on top of my feet. I cannot make out his face, but I can see his jaw working, moving, speaking, yet no words come out that I can hear. After some time, my eyes adjust, and I can almost read his lips, but I still cannot make out any decisive meaning. One thing is certain. He repeats himself endlessly. Maybe his jaw churns out that same rhythm every 10 seconds or every 10 minutes. Time is unreliable in these situations, but I know that he speaks the same enunciations throughout the night. Sometimes, if I watch him long enough and allow myself to project my own thoughts to his lips, I think I can see him saying my name. Hello, James. 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 Hello, James.
Hello, James.
This was Mia's voice now. I'm no longer in bed, and my mind and body are mostly awake.
Hello, James.
She said again, gesturing towards something with one hand and nudging my shoulder with the other.
Ground control to James.
She repeated one last time.
You still with us, spaceman?
I blinked several times, and suddenly, the waking image of the previous night's paralysis faded even as the memory cemented itself in my mind's eye. Still here, I said, which was only half a lie.
So, what do you think? Cozy, retro, and it would look great next to that desk your dad gave us.
Great, I said. Surrounding me were dozens, hundreds maybe, of wooden shapes, wardrobes, cabinets, tables, chairs, each of which had been carved sometime early in the century prior. They were antiques, which meant that they were marked up to a figure which was sure to significantly outweigh their original selling price. What's worse was that each individual item seemed to smell like cigarettes and booze, ripe with age, the scent as much a part of the pieces as their hinges and bolts. But Mia liked antiquing, and I liked Mia, so here I was. You think it still works? I said.
Maybe. We could ask. I doubt its speaker quality is much better than our phones, though.
I shrugged and eyed up the $200 radio that sat on the carpeted floor in front of me. It was not exempt from the stink which haunted the other antiques, nor the heavy wooden style which seemed to have been all the rage 70 years ago. But the radio speakers were intact, the same fibers stitched together that had likely been joined thrice as long as I'd been alive. The speakers were built into the piece's high arch shape, which gave the impression the whole machine was sort of a waist-high doorway. A motionless dial and dusty knobs protruded from its surface, having last been adjusted God knew how long ago. A wooden carving into the surface of the radio, which looked like a tree with symmetrical branches, covered the speakers. I thought this appealing, but Needless artistry would muffle the sound of whatever frequency the user was tuned into. But then again, I wasn't planning on using the ancient thing. All it needed to do was look nice, and it was fulfilling its purpose. I sighed. A lot of money for a broken radio, I said.
Come on. It's not like it's the first time we've spent money on something we didn't need.
Mia looked up at me with those big brown eyes, her auburn hair cupping her chin perfectly. Begging doesn't work on me, I said. We're getting this because we need to fill that spot next to Dad's desk. No other reason, and definitely not because you're begging. Mia smiled. The junk radio probably weighed 50 pounds, but I couldn't let the store attendant carry it out to our car while Mia was with me. I'd never hear the end of it. So instead, I bit the bullet at every turn. And I carried it to the car, I drove it to the apartment, I carried it up the stairs. I placed it next to the mahogany desk that smelled like my dad's cigars. I noted that, considering neither Mia nor myself smoked, our place sure stunk of tobacco. Antiques have a way of doing that to a home.
You know, I'm not sure I like it after all.
Mia said, after I finally managed to put the wooden cathedral, the antique store's name for the radio, not mine, on the precise center of the table next to the desk. I glared at her and showed her my palms. The hard wedges of the radio left thin red indents into the flesh of my fingers, just above my aching, swollen wrists. It should be said that I'm not much of a manual laborer.
Kidding!
She said, throwing her arms around my waist.
It's perfect. Thanks, James.
I smiled. Mia had a weird, foxy sense of humor that matched her petite build and sharp features. It was one of the reasons I liked her, but I didn't have the energy to laugh.
Hey, don't take this the wrong way, but you seem a little out of it today.
I shrugged. Sorry.
Trouble sleeping again?
She asked, taking a step back. Well, something like that. Me and I shared a bed long enough for her to know that my sleep was only half my own. Part of many a night belonged to my waking dreams and the complete immobility which accompanied them. Sometimes I was aware of her breathing beside me, warming the bed with her body while I was frozen in place. Sometimes I couldn't feel her at all.
You know,
She said.
I've read about your symptoms online. You're not the only person with this condition. There's stuff you can do to keep it from happening.
I know, I said, walking her back to our couch where we both took a seat. Less caffeine, going to bed at the same time every night, avoiding screens, but honestly, Mia, it's not really that big a deal. It's just a dream. She shook her head.
I'm worried about you. Sleep deprivation can cause all sorts of issues. A girl I used to work with, she had the same problem. She thought she saw a deer walking around her house every time it happened to her. It got to the point where just mentioning the animal would make her tremble. I don't want that to happen to you.
I placed an arm over her shoulder and offered my best, "It's all going to be fine" face. It won't. And didn't that girl you worked with, Ashley, wasn't it? Wasn't she an alcoholic or something? Mia rolled her eyes.
Yeah, but that's not the point. We're talking about sleep deprivation. Your sleep deprivation, not hers. I don't want to wake up one night to you having a heart attack.
I stifled a laugh. I'm not going to have a heart attack. Hell, it doesn't even happen to me most nights. Maybe once every couple weeks, sometimes less. Mia relaxed a little, resting her head on my shoulder.
I know, but that story you told me, it's just so creepy. A man sitting on our bed, whispering to you? You can only see the shape of him? It gives me the creeps. I know I would be terrified if it happened to me.
I knew the radio didn't work. The antique store employee told us as much when we bought it, but the dangling cord hung uselessly from its back, which annoyed me. It would look better plugged in, regardless of whether it functioned. That was why we bought the damn thing, to look nice, and a loose cord didn't match the aesthetic. So, I plugged it in. The plug fit neatly into the socket behind the table where it sat. No adapter necessary. Job done. All that was left was to let the radio fade into the background of the apartment, like one of our paintings or the coatless coat rack by the front door. I walked back to the couch, flopped onto a cushion, and got back to what I'd been watching before I noticed the loose cord. It was some news feature with a very serious-faced reporter giving updates on some coastal power outages further north. He read his copy in a stern, worried tone of voice as he outlined how the blackouts could affect shipping lanes and supply chains. Normally, it's not the sort of thing I pay mind to, but something about the reporter's voice intrigued me. It was familiar in an oddly comforting sort of way, and it held my attention to the point that I almost didn't hear the faint static sound coming from behind me. Almost.
200,392.
I didn't react. I was still watching the news. I registered the meager, muffled voice in the same way that someone does a grunt from their settling house or the ticking of a clock. For all purposes, it hadn't even happened.
200,387.
That time, I did react. I craned my neck behind me, checking the source of the sound. We'd had the radio for about a week, and I was almost used to its presence as a still and silent member of the household. The hell? I said under my breath. I grabbed the remote from the coffee table and muted the television. Sure enough, a faint but distinct static buzz echoed from the speakers of the radio. I raised my eyebrows. So the thing had a pulse after all. Well, maybe we'd gotten a deal on it if the antique store had sold us a good radio for the price of a broken one.
200,384.
Another number. Reaching the table, I leaned over the radio and began twisting one of the knobs beneath the dial. I wasn't entirely sure how the antiquated tech worked, so I figured I'd learn on the fly. I hoped to find the classic rock station so that I could surprise Mia with the sound of Journey coming through speakers almost twice as old as the band when she got home. However, the more I adjusted the knobs, the fainter the sound got. Come on, I whispered. 92.3, 92.3. It was no use. I sighed. The radio static echoed on the edge of audibility as I stepped away from the wood cathedral.
200,373.
Yeah, rub it in, I said, reclaiming my seat on the couch and starting up the movie for the second time. I don't know why I didn't just turn it off or unplug it. Maybe I harbored some belief that it would fix itself if I left it on for a while. You know, let it warm back up after its decades-long nap.
200,370.
I fell asleep before I could tell if it had fixed itself. It had been a long week at the office, and with Mia visiting her sister for the day, I knew I'd probably end up napping some before bedtime. When my eyes fluttered open and adjusted to the dimming light of the late day, the wall clock read 6:32. My back ached from having spent the past 3 hours curled up on the couch, and I attempted to stretch, but my muscles didn't respond to my brain's orders. I tried again to no avail. I couldn't so much as wiggle my toes. Another paralytic episode. As soon as I realized what was happening, the thought of the shadowy figure took center stage in my consciousness. And, as is always the case with dreams, as soon as I remembered him, he appeared. He was in a new place this time, somewhere I'd never seen him before, on my television screen. The background of the TV showed my own room, dim and dark as it normally was in the middle of the night. The figure sat shrouded in shadows on the edge of my bed, his jaw working as it always did, and still no sound came out. He was staring directly at a camera that wasn't there, at me, frozen on the couch.
200,210.
Jesus, I said aloud, snapping out of the dreamlike state almost instantly. The radio's monotonous, toneless, voiceless countdown had come from the figure's mouth, even as the wood cathedral sound echoed from behind me. I felt a surge of panic and confusion, something that had never happened to me during these episodes. My spot on the couch was soaked through with sweat. On the wall, the clock now read 7:13. I'd spent nearly 40 minutes in that half-awake state, despite it feeling like a few seconds. Dread bubbling like tar in my gut, I turned my head towards the radio. No sound came from it, not even the static of a blank frequency. It was still plugged into the wall, but gave no indication of power surging through its inner mechanisms. The old piece sat there on the table, its arched frame looking too much like a silent gravestone. I turned back to the TV and increased the volume, hoping to drown out my sudden paranoia with infomercials and 90s-era sitcoms, a tried-and-true remedy. I remained in a half-state of fight or flight, unsure of whether my nightly mania was creeping into my waking hours. When Mia arrived, the sound of the door unlatching sent my heart racing. She came through with her usual smirk, the one where the corner of her mouth twitched a little higher than the other. The expression which I'd grown to love vanished the instant she saw me. She was smart, like I said. She knew something was up. I tried to play it cool, but to no avail.
It happened again,
she said, and I didn't bother denying it, just nodded my head.
On the couch?
I nodded again.
Jesus, James, you're white as a sheet.
Sorry, the radio, it worked its way into my head. Had a dream about it, I think. I saw the usual guy on the TV set. I wrung my fingers, sucking air between my teeth. The TV kept playing. A laugh track sounded off. I reached for the remote and muted the set. It was weird. It was like I could hear him through the radio, like his voice was just behind me.
You want to get rid of it? The radio, I mean. Or the TV. Or both.
Mia asked. She was serious, too. She loved the stupid radio, and I'm sure she enjoyed the TV as well, but I guess I still took first prize overall. I appreciated it. No, come on. I was just watching a horror movie. It's hardly the first time one of those has given someone a nightmare. I'll stay off of screens for the rest of the day like we talked about. We'll go to bed early. No problem. I didn't mention that I'd heard the radio when I was almost certainly still awake, that I'd even tried to pick up a stronger signal. I gave it a quick glance from the couch, still plugged in. My mind hadn't made that part up, but the voice? Well, that was tougher to explain. At the moment, I chalked it up to early onset sleep paralysis. I doubted that was a thing, but it was a more soothing answer compared to schizophrenic episode. But all the same, Mia didn't look satisfied.
If this keeps up, we're going to a doctor. There's gotta be something we can do about this. A drug, a therapy. I don't know, but something.
I didn't want to argue about it, didn't have the energy, so I silently agreed with a nod. Mia slid onto the couch next to me, like she had the day before.
You're burning up. I can feel the heat coming off you. You sure you're okay?
You know I get hot when I sleep.
And you had a dream about that busted old radio?
Yeah. It was reading off numbers, like a countdown. Mia pulled a ghoulish face.
10, 9, 8.
She said with something like a Transylvanian accent. I laughed. Close. Numbers were bigger, though, in the hundreds of thousands. Mia shrugged.
What happens when it reaches the bottom?
Certain doom, end of days, moon turns to blood, was all revealed to me in a dream.
I can't wait to hear more from the Book of James,
Mia said, placing a hand over her heart and fluttering her eyes.
What should I do if I'm to be saved?
I considered her question with great deliberation. You know, I think we're both already damned.
100,644.
The voice said in its usual staticky but borderless voice. No age, no identifying characteristic to it other than it sounded as though it was coming through an AM radio, which I suppose it was. The figure on the edge of my bed continued voicing the numbers, even as I heard them coming through the radio in the living room. I couldn't move, and it was one of those times I couldn't even feel Mia in the bed beside me. But the shadowy thing's weight was noticeable near my feet, the shape of him compressing into my mattress.
100,637.
I stared at his lips, listening to the voice on the radio with unusual focus. I don't know why I was more clear-headed on this occurrence, but I was. I could see its outline pressed against the wall, the faint shadow it cast in the darkness. The simple, direct voice was even more understandable from its relatively distant source. More than ever before in times like this, I was awake. And then suddenly, the sound stopped. The mouth kept working, but the sound was gone. There was nothing. And then I was shaking, and
James!
Mia shook me so hard I felt my head hit the bedpost. What the hell, Mia? I said. But the truth was, I didn't feel all that tired. It really was as if I'd been awake for a while, just watching the shadowy thing speak.
James!
She said in a shaky voice. I looked at her, the sweat soaking her face, her bloodshot eyes, her ashen skin. If this was how I looked after I suffered a sleep paralysis event, then I now understood her growing concern. Mia, what's wrong? I said in a softer tone. You okay? I lowered my voice. Is there someone in the house? Did you hear something? She nodded. My heart and stomach dropped. I kept an old baseball bat under the bed for situations like this, though I never thought I'd need it.
Not like that,
Mia said. She must have seen the look on my face and known what I was thinking.
The radio, the numbers, the ones you said you heard, in the hundreds of thousands? From the radio, I heard it.
Now, you might think I'm crazy, but this actually sent a brief wave of relief through my system. If Mia heard the radio, then that meant I wasn't hearing things myself. It meant I'd picked up some old station where the numbers were automatically read. It would explain why I could hear the staticky voice in my sleep, why the numbers matched what I thought the Shadow Man was whispering every night he appeared. Hey, honey, it's fine. I should have told you. I plugged the radio in myself, picked up a station that I don't think is actively used anymore. It's just numbers rolling on repeat, like an old NASA frequency or something. She shook her head furiously, too panicked to even breathe properly.
I know! I unplugged it before we went to bed.
What? I said, sitting up against the headboard. Why?
I don't know, I didn't like the look of it plugged in. I can't explain why, it didn't seem right somehow. But it doesn't matter, just look.
With a growing sense of dread, I turned my eyes towards the end of our bed. That thing which had Mia so terrified was only just visible and fading fast. But I could see it, a compression in the mattress on top of the sheets, as if someone had been sitting there just a few moments before. I remembered the last thing I heard before Mia shook me awake. A number still in the hundreds of thousands, but a lot smaller than the ones I heard yesterday. The ones that Mia could hear as well. A countdown.
100,620.
That damn Sarah Hadley is dangerous. She's been dowsing for dead animals ever since the last of the winter snow melted. The Hadley girl is always carrying that same crooked bit of willow branch. Sarah holds it out in front of herself with her eyes closed, and then makes faces like she's detecting something invisible in the air. She calls it her sensing stick. I've seen her digging things up, too. She's telling everyone who asks that she can make the little corpses feel better again. I will admit that I've noticed a strange abundance of squirrels and blue jays in the parklands this year. Maybe that's just an eerie coincidence, though. The recent winter's snowfall in Ashland was also irregularly heavy. Sometimes things are related, and sometimes they aren't. Speaking of things that might, or might not, be connected, almost a dozen people went missing this winter. Not a single one of them has returned to Ashland or otherwise been found. The police are starting to think these incidences might all be related. In the papers, it's been theorized that a single unknown assailant might be living here in town. They've started calling this unknown person the Ashland Flare. No official leads on a suspect yet, though. That's even despite all the body parts that started turning up around town. It's ugly business, to be sure. Sarah's 19 with the mind of an 11-year-old. Physically, she's more like a young man. The girl is nearly 6 feet tall and broad in the shoulders. She's not just big. She's got muscles all over her body. I've caught Sarah on my property a few times now, and each time I'm afraid to have her anywhere near me. She climbs the chain link to let herself into my backyard without my permission. I've had to chase her off every time that she's done it. Her dowsing rod keeps bringing her back. I don't keep pets, and I never did. I've told her that several times now, but she doesn't seem to believe me. Neighborhood kids have started saving up their lunch money and allowances to hire Sarah. They want her to bring back the dead pets. She's more than happy to accept all their pocket change and crumpled up bills they managed to bring her. Parents have started to worry, and I've decided to start being more vocal about my own concerns. It's felt good to share my anxiety with others in the community. There's no question that Sarah Hadley will keep stirring up trouble in Ashland. If she hasn't done so already, she'll soon go way too far. The kids have started sneaking out after night. Even stranger, there's stories about pets coming back. Parents shrug it off, mostly. Mundane explanations are quickly found, because the only alternative is to believe Sarah's claims. It's not the same dog. They say it's just an oddly similar animal that's wandered into town. Coincidences like that seem harmless enough at first. I've seen a few families chasing animals away, though, too. The father shouts and brandishes some makeshift weapon while standing in the driveway, and the mother waits nearby until the animal is out of sight. Usually she's trying to convince her crying children that it wasn't their dog that's being chased off. It's hard to tell how much Sarah understands because she's developmentally delayed. She could be a killer. That's certainly true. It wouldn't take a wild stretch of imagination to think of her bludgeoning or stabbing a man to death. She's a remarkably strong girl. Sarah might easily fill the role of the Ashland Flare. The only missing piece is a demon in her heart. In my opinion, that's what makes someone lash out to kill a stranger. When you look at a person from the outside, there's no way to tell whether that demon is there. I heard rustling outside my window last night. and retrieved my gun before heading to investigate. I clicked on the porch light as I stepped outside. At the periphery of the illuminated area, I found Sarah Hatley creeping near the side of the house. She looked dazedly in my direction as I leveled my rifle at her. "You damn girl," I hissed loudly. "You're trespassing." Maybe it took her eyes a moment to adjust to the floodlight that I'd brought outside with me. When she recognized the firearm that I carried, Sarah's face changed briefly into an expression of obvious anxiety. "There's dead animals buried here," she stuttered out. Her face returned to tranquil blankness as I lowered my gun, but a trace of fear remained. That damn stupid dowsing rod of hers was still pointed in the direction of my house. The tip of the branch wavered gently in the air as Sarah's hands began to tremble. I could tell that she was still thinking about how she had risked getting shot. "I don't keep any pets," I told her yet again. "I never have." I shouldered my rifle as though I was ready to drive Sarah off my property by force. She made the same anxious face as before. "I don't want to see you here ever again," I growled. "Awful sorry, mister," she responded, "but there's dead critters here that want healing." Looking crestfallen, she turned and started walking in the direction of her own house. I kept my gun at hand and the porch light on as I watched her leave. Sarah lifted herself over the chain-link fencing at the border of the property and continued walking into the darkness until I could no longer see her. Maybe I overreacted, but could you really blame me? The local newspapers published another story about the Ashland flare this morning. The flare's been connected to another disappearance that happened in the late hours of New Year's Eve. The police claim that they're narrowing their list of suspects, but they haven't arrested anyone yet. That's got me feeling scared. The last thing I need now are random townsfolk sulking around on my property. If I let my guard down, then I'm risking my own neck. I suppose that's true for anyone, isn't it? One of the strange dogs that's supposed to have been healed by Sarah caused some serious trouble today. It went berserk and started biting the kid that paid Sarah to bring his old dog back. By the sound of it, the kid took some really nasty bites. It was basically mauled. Finally, the people of Ashland are starting to organize against that weirdo clan of Hatleys. The mother and father are just as odd as Sarah is. Maybe they're afraid of their own daughter. Could that be why they never speak up about her behavior? The boy that was mauled returned from the hospital today. He wore some fresh stitches in his neck down near the collarbone where the teeth had gone in. He's claiming that it's his fault that the dog bit him. He says that Sarah didn't do anything wrong. Apparently, he did something that used to bother his dog before it died. He did it to test whether his new dog was really the same one he buried last summer. He says that's how he's certain now that the creature that bit his throat open can only be verified as the body of his old pet. That irrational fool of a boy says that he still loves his childhood pet. Some people from the town went out to confront the Hatleys last night. I was among them. Sarah's parents were shy and did not seem to take our anger seriously. They meekly defended their daughter. They proclaimed that their family was innocent on all counts. The father claimed instead that the evil happenings around Ashland must be coming from somewhere else. The Hatley's mother even dared to whisper that there was something particularly strange about my own property. I spat in anger to hear it, and then I loudly called the whole family devil worshippers. I said it right into their faces, and did not grant any of them a single batted eye of doubt or sympathy, while the family denied it. The town was mostly on my side by the end of it. We'd decided by now that the Hatleys were no good. The police continued to provide no real answers about the disappearances that occurred over this past winter. It's become something of a nightly routine for many people in Ashland to carefully check their surroundings before bed. Some from the community like to watch their yards from behind the barely parted blinds that obscure their upstairs windows. Other people are brave enough to step out onto the sidewalk near their homes to talk with neighbors. Eventually, we all go inside and lock up extra securely at dusk as it wanes tonight. I've started to complain more openly about that damn Sarah Hadley. I think she's the sole source of all this trouble. That's what I tell the parents of those children who have asked for $5 or $10 to give the Hadley girl. They want their dead pets back, and she's playing along with a perverted sort of glee in order to keep pocketing their money. She's just a girl, some of them responded. Sarah's a grown woman and stronger than some men, I tell them. My correction of this detail is stern enough to make most people's eyes flit nervously away from me. No one wants to look me in the eye because I'm saying things that disturb them. She's strong and strange enough to drive a knife into someone who doesn't suspect it. I declared, aloud more than once. And she's sneaky enough to find people who would make good targets. It was a Sunday morning when Sarah Hadley finally went too far. She found something in the town square that Ashland police had completely failed to notice. I was one of the first people to gather around her as Sarah started prying up the cement pavers that were there in the public promenade. She looked to be keen on revealing a section of soil that was hidden underneath. Reaching down into the dirt with her bare hands, Sarah quickly uncovered the rigor mortis arm of a corpse. It had been buried only inches beneath the surface of the ground. The killer had covered the body with little more than a dusting of dirt, and then simply crunched the heavy cement pavers back on top of the shallow grave that had been made there. Now Sarah was gripping the corpse by its exposed wrist. She was heaving with all her strength to bring more of the body up and out of the ground. Those of us who were standing there with Sarah begged her to stop. The police will be here soon, we told her. You don't need to touch the body anymore. Sarah kept digging, though. She was prying at the caked-on dirt with her fingertips to reveal more of the corpse. It soon escalated and became even worse than that, though. Repeatedly, she drew her nose and mouth disgustedly close to the putrefied flesh. Was she smelling it? No, it was even worse than that. Each time that Sarah's face went near the arm, I could see that she was leaving tooth marks behind. That damn girl is biting the body! I screamed in pure revulsion. She's tasting it! My accusation was enough to draw Sarah out of her reverie. She looked up to all of us who were gathered there around her. With a look of fear on her face, she glowered toothily at us and revealed that there were indeed gritty bits of rotten coagulate stuck in and around her mouth. Solidified blood stained the crooked angles between most of her teeth. The saliva from her tongue rehydrated some of the congealed mess, returning it to something like fresh blood flow. The liquefied red trickled down in rivulets from the pouting corners of Sarah's mouth. "It's a misunderstanding," Sarah wailed. "I found this fella down here, but I didn't do nothing to him." She let out a scream of frustration. "He just needs waking up. I have to wake him up now, or he won't get another chance. He wants to get up here, along with the rest of us. He's begging me to help him wake up." Sarah brought her voice down into something like unintelligible sobbing, and remained sitting by the corpse she had unearthed. She sat like that until the police arrived. They put Sarah in a holding cell down at the county jail, and they brought the remains of that corpse to the morgue. It'll take a few days for the body to be identified properly. I reckon that we'll learn a lot more in the coming days, but it's already gotten to the point where the community of Ashland seems to have come to a final consensus. The Hatleys are going to have to be forced out of town. We'll drive them out with weapons and actual bloodshed if it has to come to that. Even local police and churches seem ready to stand aside and let us take matters into our own hands. I suspect the newspapers won't breathe a word of it if we're ultimately forced to kill them. We'd all be criminally complicit for just defending ourselves and our homes. What sense is there in airing an honest, dirty town's laundry like that? Sarah's back out of jail on a pathetically small bail amount. It was made clear to her that we mainly just never want to see her face again. The Hatleys are packing up everything in their house, and they'll be on the road soon enough. I don't know exactly how much of a direct role I've had in purging that clan from my beloved Ashland, but I'm glad, at least, to see that they're finally almost gone. It's an undefinable relief, but I wonder whether this really could be the end of my restless nights. Am I finally safe? You and I are strangers, dear listener, and I'm confident that we'll never meet. For this reason, I can at least admit this to you. I'm the one they call the Ashland Flare. The remains of no fewer than 30 victims are buried in the cellar beneath my house. I work in the winter to stifle the smell. By springtime, I've cleaned and preserved all the trophies that I care to keep. I hope, for their own sake, that the Hatley family never tries to come back to Ashland. If Sarah Hatley douses her way back onto my property, she's going to find a lot more than she ever bargained for.
It's going to be an experience.
She remembered Paul saying as the car pulled up to the ranch-style Airbnb. Cynthia could already feel this was a bad idea. She had been open to Paul's silly horror ideas in the past, regardless of their stupidity or his demented teetering towards the unreal. As her eyes focused on the house with the dirt-saddled siding and withered bushes in the front, on the theme for the creepy attraction, she let out a long sigh without realizing it.
Oh, come on.
Paul said. She looked away from the house, meeting her husband's excitable eyes. What?
You sighed.
No.
Yes, you did.
I did not, she exclaimed, knowing she was a liar. Whatever, she added, unbuckling her seatbelt. She looked back at the quirky house as the strap smacked into place. It had eyes leering right at her. They were just windows to the living room, but in her mind, they blinked. She knew this was impossible, but she was in a staring contest with the house, built on the land where the bodies of several children were broken and slain. She felt the sweat in her armpits and breasts.
Let's see our castle for the night, my queen,
Paul said, offering the sarcastic, dumb face she had seen before. Usually, it made her laugh. This time, it made her bite the inside of her cheek. Paul jumped out of the car, and the slamming of the door made her jump in her seat. She watched her husband smile with glee, looking at where they were to spend their only vacation in the past 7 months. As she unbuckled her seatbelt, reached into the back seat, and pulled out her vintage Polaroid camera. It had been one of the many finds during her thrifting years, and she was amazed she could still buy film for it online. As she opened the door, she used her car's hood to balance her shot and snapped a photo with a wheeze. She pulled the picture out, waving it in the air, keenly aware there was something wrong. The windows to the soul of Mr. Frowny's house were still peering at her. The door creaked as Paul pushed with his hip.
Lucy, I'm home,
he yelled. Dropping their suitcases near his feet, he looked across the house and was shocked by the bleakness. The ad told him there was very little to want in the place, but for such an infamous location, he expected a little bit of pizzazz. There was a used plaid couch, either left to collect dust or bought from a local thrift store, with a family of bedbugs in tow. Beside it was an eclectic chair, antique, ugly, and worn. There were plenty of rips along the handle and a fresh set of cobwebs near its feet. In the corner was an old TV stereo console with dusty vinyl sets and an empty decanter in the middle of 4 bemired glasses. Paul knew right away they would not spend hardly any time in the living room, unless Cynthia would go through with the Ouija board. They had spent a lot of money on the rental, and he hoped she at least tried for his sake. He didn't ask a lot from her, but from the look on her face, that might not be the case. A rumble from behind him pulled him out of his head. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, still holding onto her bags.
Pretty sparse, yep.
He said, looking back into the living room. "You don't expect us to stay here?"
Why not?
"There's no furniture."
You saw that in the ad. They wrote that.
I thought maybe it was a joke or something." Paul's eyes lit up.
I wonder if he fucked someone up on the couch?
"Paul?" He ignored her.
Like maybe he had a kid sitting in this chair.
He started, walking towards the living room.
And then, with his frown and all, he sliced their throat.
Paul gestured across his throat, a frown on his face the whole time. "That's not funny."
Oh shit, lighten up. You were all about this place when I showed you.
"I know, but..."
But what?
It's fucking creepy."
Durr. That's the whole point.
She nodded her head, but still held tight to her bag, standing in the entryway.
Please come in?
He asked. Cynthia stood her ground, the clutch of her bag scrunched in her hand. Paul walked forward and reached for her hand.
Come on.
She let him pull her in, as if proving to the house she was not a willing participant. Something about this comforted her a bit. As she walked in, she set her things on the TV console as they headed towards the living room. The Polaroid picture fell out of her unzipped purse as it all settled. If she had looked at the picture before stuffing it down her purse, she would have seen a pair of long red shoes and a puffy red wig sticking out from behind the unkept bushes to the side of the house. Emanating from the picture, a laugh is heard and softly disappears. The hallway was just as spare. As they walked along, Cynthia noticed a few frames had been removed, the rectangular remnants staining the outdated wallpaper. She rubbed her finger along the outline and turned her head to realize she was alone. "Paul?" she said. "Paul!" She walked a few steps before Paul jumped out from one of the rooms. "You asshole!" she screamed, slapping him a few times on the arm. With a huge smile, Paul laughed.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have.
"Fucking asshole," she uttered, putting her hands on her chest. "Don't do that, ever again."
I won't, but you got to see this.
She could feel her heart pound through the black lace of her shirt, afraid of what made Paul so excited. When Paul had showed her the Airbnb ad, she was just as thrilled by the idea, and as there was no way a city would let a house be built on a site where over 15 kids had been murdered at the circus, right in the tent next to the black Ferris wheel in 1943. It had been labeled the crime of the century, but only by those who lived nearby. With the war going on, it hardly made the newspaper at all, appearing on the 3rd page from the dedicated reporter who was only writing locally because of a 4F for bad eyesight. Little did they know what a cult following Mr. Frowny, the killer clown, would have over 60 years later. So, when Paul suggested they spend the night, Cynthia trusted her gut it would be safe. Upon entering the room, all she felt was her gut tightening. Sprawled across the room was every clown paraphernalia possible. Punching bags, fast food toys with their mascot gleaming on the plastic. Even a poster from the Burns Tire Company, whose mascot, Bosco the Mechanic Clown, was smiling and waving for people to come in and fix their tires. It was a cornucopia of big-top memorabilia, the likes any coulrophobe would petrify upon entering.
Isn't it incredible?
Paul asked. This is fucking gross, she spoke softly, staring at a jack-in-the-box already popped open and wobbling from the air vent.
I know, right? Amazing.
Her eyes searched the room, afraid to stop on any one item. Her gut strained more, and she knew they should leave. Paul,
There it is!
He interrupted and rushed towards the deck in the corner. He reached for his phone, scrolling a bit, and gleamed
It
at
says this desk sits on the same fairgrounds where he created Mr. Frowny before he was killed. It also says he would tie them in the corner and make them watch him put his makeup on. Look at that!
he yelled, pointing in the corner. Cynthia dreaded looking, knowing it would be there, hanging from an old antique rack. She stared at him instead, willing to fight the urge, but it was too much. Drooped along the rack was the red and blue suit she had seen plenty of times in the crime scene photos. Most were black and white, so seeing the suit in all of its variegated glory, too much of a thrill. Her heart pulsed in her neck, but not like before. This was from happiness. This was about catching the prey of the hunter. She was looking at Mr. Frowny's death robe and hated how much she loved it.
Totally rad.
Paul foolishly spoke. You think it's? She started to speak.
His? No fucking way. That's in an evidence box somewhere.
Her eyes focused on the bronze stains along the front. But look,
It's fake blood.
he said, walking over and grabbing it. Paul! She screamed.
See?
He said, holding it up to her.
His suit would be way bloodier, but I give them credit. It looks pretty close. Smells like shit.
She shook her head, knowing he had made some mistake somehow. Paul saw her reaction.
Oh, stop, Sin. It's all in showmanship.
He dropped the garment and looked past her towards the wall.
Look at that.
Above the makeup station hung a felt painting of a clown. But they knew exactly who it was supposed to be. They had a different version in their basement, above their Blu-rays and autograph collection from famous horror movie stars. Theirs was done by an artist who panhandled at the conventions. This was done by someone long since forgotten. Looking at the two of them was Mr. Frowny, a clown with a painted-on frown, smiling the widest grin with sickly teeth. In his hands were a bunch of balloons and a long, sharp knife dripping with blood. A group of young children formed a circle around him, their popped balloons dropping in their hands, crying as their tears spilled upon the ground littered with popcorn and funnel cakes. She was horrified by the painting. This is too weird, babe, she finally said. He would not have admitted it to her, but so was Paul. He collected his thoughts for a second before responding.
No, it's not. It's the best. Oh my gosh, look. His eyeliner.
God damn it, Paul! I'm done. He realized it had gone a bit too far and held up his arms in defeat.
Let's order some dinner. Hot dogs?
She was already out the door halfway through his sentence.
Oh, stop it. That was funny.
He added and walked out after her. As they argued down the hallway, a faint sound of the circus came from the closet door. A small beam of yellowish strobing light rose from the crack underneath, like the top of a carousel spinning around and around. From inside the light, a few kernels of bloodied popcorn fell to the ground as the ghostly laughter of children turned into distant screams. For Cynthia, the knock on the door could not have come soon enough. She had been starving ever since they had been lied to when it said the house was stocked with food. Not the absence of food bothered her as much as it was just another thing to add to the hatred of the Mr. Frowny house vacation. Paul opened the door.
Perfect,
He said, already salivating from the smell of the delivery pizza. Paul thought the guy was in his early 20s, making the best out of a life that would only get harder. Paul felt he better tip a little more.
Here you go.
He said, handing over an extra $5.
I didn't know anybody ever stayed here. Is it spooky and shit?
The pizza delivery boy asked.
Oh, yeah.
Paul answered.
Are there body parts and bones and shit?
Paul thought for a second before answering.
Yep.
Gnarly!
The pizza delivery boy smiled and walked away from the house. Paul placed the pizza down on the kitchen table and looked at Cynthia. She reloaded the Polaroid, sipping on a warm glass of whiskey they had brought along.
Need a refill?
This is my second, so no, she answered back. She knew it was not wise to be drinking, but somehow she had to shake these feelings away, and it was too early for the happy vape. Paul surveyed the feast before him and smiled. Cynthia saw this and knew she loved him more than ever. Her mind told her to capture the precious moment. She whipped out her Polaroid, flashed Paul with a mouthful of pizza, and pulled the film to shake it.
Here.
He said, throwing a slice of pizza in front of her. She reached over to pull it closer, setting the picture down, when she froze. In the middle of the picture, behind the kitchen archway, was a poof of red, curly hair popping out. She shoved the chair back, sliding her plate to the floor.
What the fuck?
He yelled. She pointed. The fucking picture! Someone's here, Paul!
Where?
He yelled. The fucking living room! Paul jumped out of his seat and ran to the other room. Paul! She yelled. Paul turned the corner, glancing around the room, and spun back at her.
There's nothing here.
What?
Come see.
He said, waving his arms around.
There's nothing here.
Cynthia rushed over and saw with her own eyes. They were the only people in the room. What the fuck is going on? She softly spoke to herself.
Look, Sin, you gotta...
Now, she was mad. Look! She ran for the picture and held it up. Look! She demanded. He felt it was kind of cute, but his stomach was usually the boss, and the boss was not happy.
Okay.
Cynthia held it out farther, as if to guarantee he would see the red hair. She shook the photo at him so hard she popped her elbow. Paul tucked his long hair behind his ears and adjusted his glasses. After a few seconds, he looked up at her.
What am I looking at?
Her eyes grew from anger. Are you fucking kidding me?
I don't see anything but my ugly face.
She whipped the picture around and saw for herself. Nothing was there but Paul and his stringy pizza. The hair was gone. She looked up and was about to speak, but the words weren't there.
I'm going to finish this delicious meal. I love the enthusiasm, though.
Paul, I swear, it was there. Paul nodded sarcastically.
Oh, yeah, sure.
He added, taking another bite. Paul, it was... She tried to struggle to find the words. Was the house getting to her? She asked herself. She knew she had seen it. She held the picture closer to her eyes, but nothing was there. When she came to terms with her sanity, she threw the Polaroid on the table and slumped in her chair. Slurping up a long string of cheese that fell on his chin, Paul smiled at her with food behind his teeth. Shut up, she muttered under her breath and looked toward the living room, before the fear of seeing the hair again made her look away. When she ordered them online, Cynthia could not wait for their arrival, and when she saw them, she had to post a picture immediately. But in the middle of the macabre house, the pajamas Paul wore looked silly as he brushed his teeth before bed. Not to mention her newly discovered distaste for the clown design all over. I should have burned those when I got them.
How dare you?
He muttered through foamy lips.
We should have gotten matching pairs.
That would be a no. He shrugged and looked back in the mirror, the foam looking like a mad smile. He spat into the sink and looked up, his maddening eyes locked with hers. She could see the light bulb slowly brighten in his mind. Although she was afraid to ask, she could not help herself. What? He slammed the Ouija board in the middle of the dirty emerald shag carpet and just smiled that grin she loved and despised all at once. No, Paul, she said, shaking her head.
We have to,
he responded. No, we don't. We fucking don't. The smile waned.
What is your problem? We've been talking about this since we booked the place. Now you're chicken?
Just because I don't want to do it doesn't mean I'm a chicken, dick. Paul ignored her and opened the box to place things around him. He knew she could be like this, but it was getting to him this time. They could have gone anywhere with the money they saved up, but Paul booked this for her. A few clicks of a mouse didn't make him her knight shining armor, but he wanted to make her happy. Cynthia had been enamored with the fear of clowns, and when the ad appeared, he knew this was the place to do just that. But here she was, crossing her arms with a face contorted in angst. Though he knew it was a bad idea, his mind told him to set it up anyways. It wasn't working. As Paul set down the chewed-upon pencil on the planchette, he looked deep into her eyes.
Sin, just come on. We said we would do this.
Yeah, like I changed my mind, okay?
No, it's not.
Well, too bad.
Now who's being a dick?
He sarcastically added, knowing well it would do nothing. Cynthia just spun around toward the hallway, hearing the door to the bedroom slam hard.
Fuck!
He yelled, hoping she would hear it. He sat there for a few minutes, knowing he could not play himself. It would be pathetic to move the pencil himself, wary the board was a fake. He waited a bit longer before getting up, kicking the board, and heading toward the bedroom. The planchette moved slightly as the door opened, and they began to argue more as the pencil scribbled, ha 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 ha. A faint laugh of a little child emanated from the vent. A sharp set of pink-stained teeth gnarled on popcorn as the children screamed in the background, begging for an adult to save their innocent souls. As Mr. Frowny pulled out a Zippo lighter with the drawing of clowns playing poker to light his drooly cigar, he lifted the knife into the air, the carousel lights glistening across the wet blood. Before he brought it down, somehow, beyond the bounds of reality, the frown turned upside down to a smile on his face. Cynthia woke from the nightmare, the sheets soaked on her naked chest. Gathering her wits, she spun around, knowing the clown was right there, until realizing it was all a bad dream. Paul's snoring helped her ease back from dreamland and nudged him to roll over, an every-night routine they were now accustomed to.
No.
He mumbled and rolled over. She looked at the clock from 1982 and saw the white squares read 3:46 before flipping to 3:47. She pulled the damp sheets off her body, and as she lifted herself out of bed with her feet, she slipped on her underwear and fell hard on her back. She pained at the wind being knocked out of her and rolled over to breathe, her eyes wide, looking under the bed. A pair of rat-like yellow eyes glistened, and a white-gloved hand sprung toward her. She screamed, backing away as fast as she could, slamming her back against the wall. Paul, grabbing her arms, made her scream again, fiercer than before, knowing it was the clown. Whatever breath she could take was lost in a fit of painful coughing. Realizing she had taken her eyes away, she quickly looked under the bed. Saw nothing.
Hey, Sin!
Paul screamed, unaware he was shaking her a bit as he pulled her up. No! No! She screamed, thrashing him away, eyes never leaving the empty dark space below the bed.
What is the matter?
Paul demanded. He's under the bed!
Who?
She tried to speak, but the pain inside was too much. Then she broke down in his arms. Paul held her tighter, feeling her tears soaking his goofy pajamas. Please look under the bed. she asked, knowing he would see nothing.
All right.
Paul said. As Paul pulled the sheets over the bed, she knew nothing. Paul turned to her, a mixture of worry and anger on his face. I saw it, she yelled through tears.
Sin.
He started and was cut off when she bolted toward the door.
Wait.
She tried to open the door, but Paul grabbed her arm. She met him with a few slaps.
Stop,
he yelled, but they kept coming until he finally backed away.
What is the matter with you?
I want to leave, she yelled, wiping away the tears. Let me go.
We're not leaving. Stop it.
Fuck you, I am.
Stop it right now.
I need to leave.
You're the one who wanted to come to this place.
I saw a fucking clown under the bed.
Nothing's there.
He said slowly to emphasize her insanity.
Go to bed.
It worked, as she realized she might lose a little more than tears. In the back of her mind, she felt the rational person who got her through the hardships of life shake their head in disapproval. She could only shake her head at him, knowing she could not return. I can't. Paul waved his hand at her.
I'm going back to bed,
he said, and started to walk toward the bed. No, Paul, listen to me, she said, leaning a little towards him, but knew better than to get anywhere near the bed.
Enough,
he said, snapping around. Paul could feel he was at the edge. He could see she knew as well. They had gone through a few bad moments a few years before, and Paul swore he would never go back, knowing the answer was in bed. Cynthia wiped her tears and walked out of the room. Paul shook his head and pulled the dry side of the sheets over his shoulders. She rushed into the bathroom and cranked the faucet with her shaky hand. She splashed the lukewarm water on her face and froze when she looked in the mirror. Hundreds of white balloons, streaked with bloody little hands, spun on their strings in the reflection behind her. Something was rattling inside the balloons as they turned. The balloons stopped spinning and exploded all at the same time. Kernels of popcorn covered her entire body, her naked flesh smeared with oily butter and blood. She felt some butter drip from her nipple and drop into the sink. She tried to scream, but her vocal cords were frozen, a small click of her throat coming out of her gaping mouth. A small glow of light illuminated from the bottom crack of the linen closet as the faint laughter of a crazed clown was feebly heard. Cynthia found the puissance to scream and rushed to the door that would not open. Her hands, drenched in butter, kept slipping across the doorknob each time. The handle to the closet door latched open. Cynthia knew she would die if she turned around and with all her being tried to turn the slippery handle. The closet door creaked with a festering grievance, the laughter louder and spurting from the monstrous throat with vaporous misery. Paul would have heard her scream by now, she thought, and knew this entity was stopping her cries for help. Yet she screamed so loud a vessel cracked in her throat. Instantly, she had no voice anymore. Desperate and feeling it was her last chance, she grasped hard on the handle. The door flung open as she ran down the hallway, unable to scream. Cynthia slammed on the bedroom door and ran down the hall till it disappeared. Cynthia stopped. She couldn't believe her own eyes. The door at the end leading to the bedroom was the same, but halfway it formed into a circus tunnel, spinning around with little holes that blasted light cylinders. She heard the hideous laugh behind her and knew she had to keep going. She took a few brave steps, but her feet slipped, streaking with buttery blood. She held her hands out to regain control, only to look up at the hallway made of mirrors and a door at the end of the tunnel. She ran toward the door, refusing to see the wretched appearance of the clown following her. She reached for the handle when the door creaked open, the scream of a child being ripped apart in the distance. Staring at her in the darkness of a void were crimson eyes, cracked with ruptured veins and a set of rotten teeth. Floating in the air like the Cheshire Cat, a chewed cigar billowing smoke through the diseased gaps. Cynthia tried her best to catch her feet as she slid along the mirrored floor, gaining speed until she fell into the darkness, the door slamming shut. Behind the door, Cynthia was able to scream again. Paul kept rolling over, thinking about what she said, acting like a lunatic. He flipped over once more before getting out of bed. He felt some reserve in the back of his neck, placing his feet near the bed frame in case she was right, but nothing swept him under, and he was ready to have her warmth next to him in bed. Before he could call her, he opened the door and planted his feet on something soggy. He lifted his foot and was caught off guard by the mushy red popcorn stuck between his toes.
Sin?
He yelled. No answer.
Cynthia, where are you?
He yelled again and looked down the hallway. Sprawled along the hallway was a long line of bloodied popcorn, trailing from their bedroom to the basement door. He ran toward the door, but it seemed forever to reach it. Every step eternity in his fear of what might have happened to her. He finally reached the door, and when he pulled it open, a menagerie of rainbow balloons sprung at him. Bloodied handprints streaked across each one.
Cynthia!
He heard himself yell from far away, brushing the balloons away from his view. From behind, a large pink clown shoe, size 36.5, kicked Paul down the stairs. He tried his best to stop the fall, but after he slammed his meaty shoulder on the 4th step, ripping his obnoxious pajama shirt, he knew he would journey till the end, broken bones and all. He finally hit the very bottom, falling into a sea of balloons. When he emerged a few seconds later, blood rushed hard from the gash in his head, and his hand throbbed. Ignoring the pain, he yelled,
Cynthia!
And he knew in his heart she would not answer. As scared as he was, he still moved forward, thrashing through the waves of balloons.
Cynthia, where are you?
From inside the balloons, she started to laugh a little. Slowly and softly, it grew after each mucusy howl.
Where are you? Sin?
He beckoned. The laugh grew stronger as he threw the balloons around, hopelessly reaching to find her. From above the stairs, a giant shadow cast on the wall. The carousel lights appeared again and a faint hint of its music aural, but only behind the deafening sounds of children laughing, popcorn popping, and oily machines spinning. Paul looked as a silhouette of a woman dwarfed the wall, and he ran to her. The relief in his heart was destroyed by the goosebumps that sprang all over his body. At the top of the stairs, dressed in the clown suit from the bedroom and eating a bag of popcorn spritzed with blood, was Cynthia. A frown painted on her mangled and gashed face. As she opened her mouth, slicing the edges of her mouth, Mr. Frowny's rancid laugh disgorged from her slit throat. Paul screamed, pressing his fingers so hard to the handrail he split the fractures further down the bone. As painful as it would be to others, Paul was only aware of the pain and fear in his lucid mind. Her eyes opened wide, blood oozing from her sockets. She laughed harder as pieces of skin slid off her face. Paul could not grasp the fear taking over his being. The woman he loved, with whom he shared his life, was gone. He knew inside his rapidly beating heart he no longer saw his beloved, but a monster. To get as far from it as possible, he backed down the steps, sinking into the stream of balloons, and felt something brush across his legs. Then he heard them inside the plastic basin, the children trolling from laughter to screaming in the same breath. Fearing this sound would be the last he ever heard, he pleaded to it.
Cynthia, help, please.
Mr. Frowny's laugh disappeared, and she began to cry as her face slid off her skull. Paul saw this, and his mind clenched. He tried to crab walk back when the little hands crawled out of the rubbery horizon. There was enough time for him to notice their tiny, rotted arms, the pale gray skin cracking and filled with bloody pus. Some of their hands grabbed his loony pajamas, and some his legs. One even grabbed his fingers, breaking them even further with the strength of a vice. As he tried to convince himself it was all just a bad dream, he made the mistake of looking over into the far corner. A spotlight turned on from nowhere on Mr. Frowny, a chewed cigar in one hand and the other a rusted cleaver, older than the longest living person alive. "You're in for the experience of your lifetime," Mr. Frowny said, laughing. Paul's mind ceased as the screaming and laughing children pulled him down into the grave of balloons. As the new renters entered the back bedroom filled with a plethora of clown relics collecting dust from years of neglect, they noticed a painting in its velvety glory and were ecstatic by its eerie scenery. In the middle of the painting, like a jester performing for a king, the children's favorite clown, Mr. Frowny, frowned as the little devils pranced around him. The children seemed happy as they had two new friends. One was in a clown suit with a smiling skull, and the other was wearing the silliest pair of pajamas you ever saw.
It was 10 minutes to 8 and the office party was winding down to a politely muted conclusion, everyone straggling to the main entrance as they shrugged on their jackets and exchanged lifeless wishes of a good weekend to come. Rob watched them go with a sour expression on his face, leaning over his cleaning cart in a passive-aggressive display of barely contained impatience. "Go on," he thought. "Hurry your stupid asses up and go." The Dynatex bigwigs used to spring for a hall rental when hosting their infrequent office parties. That practice came to a squalid conclusion at a Christmas shindig 3 years ago, when the former head of marketing got into a booze-fueled scuffle with a junior member of the accounting team. After that incident, all subsequent work-related events were held under the harsh fluorescent glow of the big showroom, adjacent to the main office. These dry and sterile affairs were over and done by 8 p.m. at the latest, just in time for old Bobby Bozeman to come rolling in with his trusty cleaning cart. As the last of them pushed through the big glass doors and stepped into the cold, Leanna came hustling over with an irritated frown. She pointed in the direction of the showroom and snapped, "There's still someone in there. It's the Bible guy. Go tell him to leave, would ya?" Rob ground his palms into his weary eyes and sighed. "Fucking hell, that guy? All right, sure, but you gotta be my backup." Leanna emphatically shook her head no and crossed her arms. "I'm not talking to that guy. He's a weirdo. You do it." Rob slumped his shoulders and grunted, "Okay, whatever. Can you go find Bronte and ask her to help us when she's done in the cafeteria? We could use another body in here tonight." Leanna was visibly relieved. She gave him a cheery thumbs up and hurried for the exit to the production floor. Rob groaned a few choice curse words to himself and trundled his cart through the accounting division, his jaw tight with anticipation of the mess which awaited him beyond the next doorway. Rob absolutely fucking hated the office parties. They were the bane of his existence. There would be 50 tables set up in 10 razor-neat rows of 5, every one of them laden with a confused mess of dirty paper plates, greasy warming trays, and dozens of half-full cans of soft drinks. Each table had 4 chairs, 200 in total, all of them needing to be stacked and stowed away, along with all the tables, the serving carts, and every other motherfucking thing, because fuck Bobby Bozeman and fuck his already hectic nightly routine. The office folks simply had to be herded together for the quarterly ritual of uncomfortable small talk and 2 choices of salad. A thick, rusty voice called out, "Mr. Bozeman?" And Rob jumped an inch or so off the floor. He'd been so deep in his bitter contemplation of the task at hand, he'd forgotten all about the straggler, a mid-level manager from the IT department named Mike Forsythe. Rob looked around and spotted Forsythe sitting at a table in the far corner, partially hidden in a slumped-over position behind a meandering stack of single-use aluminum serving pans. Rob mentally braced himself for the encounter and gave Forsythe a cheerful wave. The brooding IT manager was a large and disheveled-looking man with a sloping gut and bulging eyes that rarely blinked. He was more commonly known as Bible Mike. Forsythe motioned for Rob to come closer and resumed staring intently at the stack of pans in front of him. There was marinara sauce splattered all over his shirt, a Rorschach pattern of careless speckles and splotches of red. He croaked, "You always seemed like an intelligent enough fellow, Mr. Bozeman. Do you have a minute? I'd like to run something past you if you don't mind." Rob made an impatient noise in the back of his throat and reluctantly rolled his cart across the room. Rob had always been wary of Bible Mike. He had the air of a person who is slowly losing a grim struggle against some violent and inevitable explosion. According to gossip on the production floor, Forsythe had been soundly reprimanded by Human Resources a number of years ago regarding his habit of haranguing his colleagues with his eccentric views on religion. Mike Forsythe was like an old stick of dynamite, sweating death and ready to unleash hell at any moment. All Bobby Bozeman knew to steer clear of someone like that. "Have you ever heard the term divine proportion by any chance?" Rob shook his head. "No, sir. I've never heard of that." Listen, I hate to rush you out of here, but I really need to get cracking on this cleanup. Are you almost finished?" "It's in the shape of things," Forsythe said, and he nodded at the precarious stack of pans in front of him. "Sequences and patterns. Divine proportion can be seen in both living and inanimate objects. Unbelievers say you can't see the hand of God at work, but that isn't true. The patterns and shapes that define our surroundings, that's where God's divinity can be found." Rob pointedly cleared his throat and swept an outstretched hand at the clutter of styrofoam cups and half-eaten desserts that lay across the table. "That's interesting, Mr. Forsythe, but we really have to get started here. We only have 8 hours to clean this whole office. Take spiral patterns, for example," Forsythe plowed on. "You can see many spirals in nature, a DNA molecule of the shell of a nautilus, the phylotactic arrangement of leaves on a stem, even the arms of a spiral galaxy. This is God's body, His will, His divinity in the physical world. Do you understand, Mr. Bozeman?" Rob didn't answer his question. He was too busy staring in horror at Bible Mike's left hand. He'd finally noticed that Forsythe's ring finger was gone. It ended in a ragged, inch-long stump of shredded flesh and splintered bone. The table was covered in drops and smears of blood. Rob dimly registered that Forsythe was still babbling about shapes and ratios, but he barely heard a single word. His finger looked like it had been torn off by a whirling belt sander, a violent, ragged separation that left irreparable carnage in its wake. Forsythe didn't seem to notice that it was missing. "But what is the flip side of this equation?" Forsythe asked. He smiled, the enthusiastic grin of a teacher who believes their pupil is equally interested in the subject matter at hand. "If God's divine will is our physical reality, then Satan must possess a radically different form." Your finger," Rob gasped. "What happened to your finger?" "If God is in the numbers, then so is the devil," Forsythe nodded. He seemed completely oblivious to Rob's words or reaction. "I'm very close to this answer, do you understand? Satan, his realm, it's the other side of the equation." "Oh, I can see the big picture. I can see." Forsythe trailed off and his smile faded. He reached out with his uninjured hand and seized Rob by the arm. He pulled him close and snarled, "I saw it. just a quick glimpse. But I saw the other side of it. And it was awful. I can't. Rob twisted free of his grasp and shuddered. Listen to me. Your finger is gone. Look, it's still bleeding. The IT manager studied his mutilated hand with vague concern. He mumbled, I didn't even notice. I must have reached past the barrier. I saw the other side, just for a split second. But I saw it. Rob was completely flummoxed. He licked his dry lips and took a big step backward. What the hell are you talking about? What barrier? Forsyth frowned and pointed at the greasy stack of aluminum serving pans in front of him. Right here, he rasped. It was right here. Okay, sure. Rob held his hands up and tried to smile. I believe you, I do, but we really need to find that missing finger. I don't know, maybe it can be fixed or... Look, we need to put it on ice and go to the emergency room. Where is it? Bible Mike abruptly shoved his chair back and stood up from the table. Rob flinched and scuttled behind his cart for safety. You don't understand, he said quietly. No one understands. Good night, Mr. Bozeman. Rob watched Forsyth walk away in open-mouthed disbelief. He shouted, Hey! Where are you going? Are you going to the hospital? Hey! Rob scurried after him, his heart hammering in his chest, but the glass doors in the front reception vestibule were already swinging shut. Bible Mike had disappeared into the night, leaving a curling smear of blood on the door handle in his wake. He regarded the bloodied door handle with a stunned expression and said out loud, What the fuck was that? What you talking about? Leanna piped up from behind him, and Rob whirled around with a scream clenched between his teeth. Well, what? She demanded. Did something happen with the Bible guy? Rob groped for a response, but he had no idea how he could even begin to explain the surrealistic insanity that had just unfolded in the showroom. Call health and safety, he grunted. There's blood in the showroom. Text me when they get here, okay? I'm going for a smoke. When Rob finally managed to get the health and safety representative to understand the situation at hand, she dropped her incident report and scrambled to call the security guard at the front gate. The guard confirmed Forsyth had left the premises. After observing the aftermath of Forsyth's severed digit firsthand, the guard promptly hurried back to the security shack and called the police. Rob and Leanna were finally allowed to start cleaning at 1 a.m, the exact time they would normally be badging out with the rest of the janitorial crew. Bronte and the others all declined to stay and help. Leanna patiently waited until everyone was gone before she hurled a dustpan across the room and unleashed a poetic tirade of curses at the delay, a ferocious flood of pure, frustrated fury that made Rob laugh until he was almost crying. It was late. He was tired. And what the fuck, man? Seriously, what the hell happened in that showroom? He couldn't get the image of Forsyth's mangled finger stump out of his head. After 10 years of pushing a mop for a living, Bobby Bozeman had thought he'd seen it all. But Bible Mike's severed finger was on an entirely different level. He didn't get paid enough to deal with shit like that. No, sir. Rob staggered through his door as the sun started to peak above the horizon. He fell onto the couch with a groan of exhaustion and immediately sank into a series of murky nightmares. A string of meaningless vignettes connected by some unseen horror that seemed to lurk behind even the most innocuous scenarios. The dreams weren't terrifying because of what he could see. They were terrifying because of something he might see, if he only knew where to look. He was jarred awake at 11:30 by the ringing of his cell phone. It was Leanna. He fumbled to answer it and groaned. What? I'm sleeping. The Bible guy killed himself. Rob's half-lidded eyes shot wide open. He sat up on the couch and blinked in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. He'd been too tired to close the curtains before he crashed. It's all over the news. The cops went to his house for a wellness check after they left the plant, and he shot at them through a window. They had a standoff for a while, and then he killed himself. Rob croaked. Holy shit. Wow. Well, he was talking some pretty weird shit in the showroom. I couldn't even really follow what he was saying. Something about God being on one side of the equation and Satan on the other side. He wasn't making sense. Like the fucking guy didn't even know his finger was gone. He was out to lunch. Leanna breathed. Wow. That's so deep down the rabbit hole, you know? It's creepy. It's sad he died, but I'm glad no one else got hurt. I guess he lived alone. That's probably a good thing. Yeah, no doubt. Rob sat quietly for a few seconds, his brow knitted in deep thought. He cleared his throat and said, "Hey, I'm gonna let you go. Thanks for letting me know. That's wild. I'll see you at work later, okay? Bye." Rob sank back into a prone position on the couch with a grunt and a sigh. He studied the fine network of cracks in his living room ceiling and thought, it's in the shape of things. 10 minutes later, he was sitting at his tiny kitchen with a mug of instant coffee in hand, squinting at a Google search while a cigarette smoldered away in a small glass ashtray beside him. Circles and spirals, angles and contours and planes. That was how the world around him was arranged. But why? What elemental force made it so? He scrolled and drank coffee and chain-smoked, and before he knew it, several hours had slipped away. We never found his finger, Rob said out loud, and the thought stopped him dead in his tracks. He either lost it in another area of the facility, or it was already gone before he came to work that day. Both of those scenarios seemed unlikely. So where was it? Where did his finger go? He bit it off, Rob thought, and he instinctively knew it was true. Lost in his near-complete break with reality, Bible Mike had chewed off his own finger and probably swallowed the goddamn thing. Well, that's enough of that, Rob thought, and he tossed his coffee mug in the sink as he headed for the shower. It was time to stop thinking about golden spirals, magical ratios, and severed fingers. It was too much. Too far. And old Bobby Bozeman was done with it. It was time to go to work. Of course, everyone at work wanted to talk about Mike Forsythe. Everyone, that is. But Rob, all he wanted was to put his head down, push his mop, and not think about anything in particular. That's all he'd really wanted in life. To put in his time and be rewarded with a quiet and solitary existence. Bobby Bozeman was a man with many acquaintances and no close friends. In his experience, almost everyone was okay as long as you didn't know anything about them. Rob kept himself busy that night, and all was well until he walked into the Human Resources office shortly after midnight. He flicked on the light and froze like a statue. There was a new poster hanging on the wall across the room. 3 by 4 foot. High-definition close-up of a sunflower. Rob stood there and gaped at it in shock with his mouth hanging open. The spiral arrangement of the developing seeds was mesmerizing. It was so neatly arrayed, so sublimely perfect, that it was hard to believe that a pattern so elegant was merely a randomized happenstance of evolution. There was meaning in that spiral. There was power. "What are you staring at?" Leanna chirped over his shoulder. Rob gasped and resisted the urge to drive an elbow into her guts. "Can you stop fucking doing that?" he demanded. "You're gonna give me a heart attack, no shit." Leanna bit down on a smile and said, "Sorry, Bosie, I thought you heard me come in. That's a really neat picture, though. The pattern is so pretty. I never noticed it before. Is it new?" Rob murmured, "Pretty? It's fucking amazing. That spiral pattern is a Fibonacci sequence. It's called the golden ratio. It allows for continuous growth without ever changing shape." "Oh, yeah, that's really interesting, you weird fucking nerd." Leanna grinned and she bustled past him with her rolling mop bucket. "Let's get to it. It's almost 12:30 already." Rob blurted, "What?" and looked at the clock in disbelief. He'd just lost nearly half a fucking hour to mindlessly gazing at a framed poster of a sunflower. A wave of disorientation washed over him, leaving him blinking at his surroundings and swaying on his feet. He felt as if he'd been rudely awakened while teetering on the precipice of the steep slope between daydreaming and deep slumber. He blinked at Leanna and thought, something's happening to me. What the fuck is going on? Time got away from me, I guess, he said, and he tried to smile. Leanna nodded and smiled back. Her eyes, however, were watchful and troubled. Oh, for sure, it happens to everyone. How about you start yanking the garbage bags and I'll come in behind with the mop? We don't have time for much else. Rob gave her an unconvincing thumbs up and fumbled into action. He felt as though he was really and truly seeing his surroundings for the very first time. A lush landscape of interlocking lines and curves that expanded in every direction for all of eternity. He could no longer look at a solitary article like a garbage can and consider it to be a complete object in and of itself. Rather, any singular item in this plane of existence was merely a piece of a bigger picture. The biggest picture. Reality was a tapestry of immeasurable proportions, sewn together by the dimensional threads of height, length, width, and time. It was the cosmic spider silk that forever spins away into the horizon of the future. If it were possible for his feeble mind to grasp the larger picture, Rob knew that he would see no garbage cans, no cubicles, no walls, no ceiling, nor even Bobby Bozeman himself. He would see a stunning patchwork of interconnecting shapes and patterns, a masterpiece of divine artistry stretching across all space and time. It's in the shape of things, Rob whispered, and then he realized he was standing all by himself in the darkness, the door closing behind his coworker with a heavy clunk as she left him standing in the middle of the office with a garbage can clutched between his hands. He fumbled for the light switch and was unsurprised to see that the clock read 1 a.m. Quitting time. Leanna had mopped around the spot where he'd been standing and staring at a garbage can with a slack jaw and glazed eyes. He wondered how many times she called his name before she clicked the light switch and left him alone in the dark. Rob plunked the can down beneath a desk and hurried to catch up with his coworker, racking his overloaded brain for some half-assed excuse for his bizarre behavior. He stopped at the exit door with his hand on the push bar. An incomprehensibly awful image had popped into his head, unbidden and terrifying. He would open the door and discover a churning, writhing state of complete chaos on the other side. Malign and inconceivable, a wailing madness of zero constants and entropic decay, the horror of time and space rendered meaningless. No, he said softly, and he began to tremble all over. Come on, what the fuck is wrong with you? Open the door! But he couldn't do it. Satan's realm awaited on the other side. And if it wasn't there, it didn't matter. Because it was everywhere. Right on the other side of a barrier he could not perceive. At least not yet. Rob's lips skinned back in a snarl and he growled, Open the fucking door, you fucking idiot! Tears rolled down his cheeks as he applied pressure to the push bar little by little, until a thin slice of light appeared at the edges. Rob flung the door open with a convulsive heave and moaned, Sweet Jesus. Holy fuck. He wiped his tears in his shirt and left without talking to anyone. When he got home, Rob chained smoke in the darkness of his living room. He fell asleep clutching a flashlight in one hand and a knife in the other. He tossed and turned almost relentlessly, but he didn't dream at all that night. And for that, he was thankful. Rob grew cold and distant as the week passed. He started sitting alone at break time, staring with an unnerving intensity at nothing in particular with a half-eaten sandwich sitting on the table in front of him. He would sometimes be observed frowning at a tattered old booklet of lined paper, tapping a pencil against the cafeteria tables as he puzzled over a page of doodles and numbers. Leanna ventured over to his table on Friday and asked what he was working on. her tone uncharacteristically soft and timid. She looked like she was ready to bolt if he tried to grab her. "Trying to figure something out," he grunted. He didn't look up from his notebook. "What are you figuring out?" Leanna smiled, and she darted a nervous glance over his shoulder. Bronte and the rest of the crew were watching from the other side of the room, huddled together around their table as they pretended to not stare at him. Rob looked up from his booklet, and Leanna's heart missed a beat. His eyes glittered in their sockets with the fever of obsession, bloodshot and ferocious. Rob was pale and drawn, and he smelled bad. "I'm trying to understand what is on the other side." Rob said it in a way that suggested Leanna was stupid for even asking such a question. She bit down on the urge to tell him to fuck himself and said, "What do you mean? On the other side of what?" "Of this," Rob snapped, and he motioned at the walls and ceilings of the cafeteria. "Not this room, I mean everything. The opposite of where we live, here in this place of existence. It's an equation." Bible Mike was right. "See? On this side of the equation, it's our world and everything else, the very big all the way down to the very small. And on the other side of the equation, everything is the exact opposite, but it's equal. The other side is..." Rob sat back in his chair and shook his head. "I don't know. It's something I can't even imagine." Leanna nodded as if she understood what he was talking about. Okay, I guess that makes sense. Well, I just wanted to come over and say hi. You've been sitting over here by yourself since Wednesday. You hardly talk to anyone. I just wanted to see if you were okay." "You know, it's funny. I thought Forsyth bit off his own finger." Rob mused, and Leanna did a double take. She blinked at him, unsure of how to respond. "He didn't, though," Rob continued. He was speaking earnestly, trying his best to get her to understand. "What happened is he taught himself to see the big picture. I mean, it's right there in front of us, but we just can't see it. This table, you, me, everything, it's all a tiny piece of a huge puzzle." Bible Mike could see the big picture, and he was starting to see even more. He saw the other side. That's how he lost his finger. Leanna took in a deep breath and hissed, "Bozy, what the fuck? Really? What is that? It doesn't make sense. It's crazy talk from a crazy guy, a guy that ended up killing himself. That isn't normal. None of this is normal." "This isn't normal?" Rob shot back, and he gestured violently at the room around them. "Are you sure? Because I think it is normal. I think reality as we know it is the result of some very powerful consciousness. God, whatever you want to call it, a deity of some kind, chose to create the universe out of itself. The beginning wasn't the Big Bang. It was the Big Birth. Divinity is everywhere. It's in the shapes of things. It's in the air we breathe. It's in us." Forsyth knew that. It might have been a whack job, but he was right. Leanna wrapped her arms around herself defensively and said, "Okay, so he was right. So what? You look like you haven't slept in days. You're obsessed with this bullshit. Just leave it alone and stop being a fucking weirdo. I am worried about you." "I can't." Rob's mouth drew down, turning his face into a pale, unshaven tragedy mask. "I don't see things the way I used to anymore. It's like one of those pictures made from all those colored dots, you know what I mean? You look at it for a while, and once you see the hidden image, you can't stop seeing it." The buzzer rang over the intercom system, signaling the end of lunch break. Rob tossed his uneaten sandwich into his cooler bag and got up from the table, wincing and cracking in his knees. He saw the other side, Rob murmured, and he tried to smile. It didn't work, so he grimaced again instead. God and Satan. They're side by side. Once I see it. What if I can't stop? Leanna didn't have an answer for that. Rob brushed past her with his head down, and Leanna wandered back to Bronte and the others. He's not doing so great, she said. I heard him talking about the devil, Bronte exclaimed, breathless with the sheer scandal of such a daring act. She crossed herself and added, He don't look so good. What if the devil starts whispering in his ear? Leanna considered this and suppressed a shudder. She said, I think he already did. Leanna distanced herself from Rob for the rest of the night. He was giving off the exact same vibe as the Bible guy, and it was scaring her. She was scrubbing the sink in the kitchenette when a jagged shriek ripped out from across the office, making her drop her scrub brush and let out a loud squeal of her own. The shrieking continued, raw and high-pitched peals of agonized terror, and Leanna rushed to see what was happening. It was Rob. Most of his arm was missing. He was crouched against his cart, screaming at the top of his lungs, and cowering from some horror that only he could see. Leanna gaped at the horrible spectacle for a moment, rendered immobile by panic, then scrambled to call security from the nearest cubicle phone. Someone's hurt in the main office, she screeched. We need an ambulance right away! Leanna dropped the handset and turned back to Rob, who was hauling himself up with his remaining arm on the side of his tottering cart. The other was a limp, useless paddle of torn shirt and flapping flesh. He was still screaming. She yelled at him to sit still, but he ignored her pleas and fumbled to the bottles on his cart until he found a bottle of drain cleaner. He flicked open the nozzle with his thumb and lifted it to his face. Leanna bellowed, Rob, no! And charged at him, but he was already squirting the cloudy fluid into his eyes. Rob's screams rose in pitch and intensity as the sulfuric acid attacked the wet surface of his eyeballs, burning and sizzling away as Leanna tackled him around the waist and pulled him to the floor. Rob writhed and bucked beneath her, his heels drumming against the polished floor. The security guard burst into the room and faltered at the sight of so much blood and commotion. Help me, she cried. Get a bucket of water! Get something for a tourniquet! Rob soon fainted dead away from the shock and blood loss. The ambulance arrived in under 15 minutes. They strapped Rob into a gurney and took him through the front entrance, rolling it along at a fast jogging pace as they ignored Leanna's demands to be more careful. As the EMTs loaded the gurney into the ambulance, Rob regained consciousness. He immediately began to scream again. It took a few seconds for Leanna to realize he was actually screaming the same 4 words, over and over again. Several months later, after Leanna finally returned to work, she was coaxed into recounting the awful details of the ordeal to Bronte, who ate it all up, with eyes as wide as saucers. When Leanna came to the end of the tale, Bronte asked, What was he saying when they took him away? Leanna gave Bronte an uneasy look and licked her lips nervously. He was screaming, I can still see. I can still see. Bronte shivered. So creepy, ugh. I heard they keep him sedated all the time. As soon as he wakes up, that's all he'll say until they put him under again. So sad, Bronte lamented. He seemed like a nice man. Yeah, Leanna said. He was a great guy. She was frowning at the swirl her spoon created as she stirred her coffee. It was oddly mesmerizing. Shapes, she murmured. It's in the... Bronte interrupted. Leanna shook her head and pushed her coffee aside. She suddenly felt cold and very small. Nothing, she said. Don't ask. You don't want to know.
I hate this case. I hate it with every fiber of my being. I thought it was done and buried. Now I'm back here at the crime scene, waiting in my car for the alcohol and Vicodin to kick in, sending a goodbye text to my ex-wife and grown child. I look into the dark shadows of the abandoned building, and I know, in my deepest heart of hearts, I am going to die in there. Once I feel the joints stop hurting, my chest stop burning, and my vision blurs at the edges, I step out into the street. The rusty doors of my old Buick squeal in protest. The old abandoned St. Emily's. Been abandoned for 10 years now. They built a new one on the exit to the freeway. Its glowing billboard offered quick care and service. Healing with hospitality was the new hospital's slogan. But not this one's. No. This wretched building had witnessed the deaths of hundreds over the years. The building had been home to the most vile scene of torture and madness to hit the state within the last 5 years. As I walked up to the entrance chained shut with a padlock, I wondered if the building was evil, or if it only attracted evil. One thing was for sure. Evil was here tonight. I fished in my coat pocket for a key, hoping it would still be the same one from 5 years ago. It took a little bit of work, but finally the padlock popped open. I walked into the dark hallway next to the stairs. This entrance used to be for employees only, but I knew it well, and I knew I had to get to the 8th floor. As I climbed the stairs, my mind raced back to 5 years ago. I had just started my PI business back then. It was my first big case after my early retirement. My old partner threw me the lead. 4 girls had gone missing in the city within the last 4 months. The last girl was 19-year-old Vivian Straub. Disappeared after taking a night class at the local community college. The case was closed when Major Crimes caught the suspected murderer, a human stain named Jeremy Whitmore. Jeremy was caught after he tried to abduct another woman. This woman pepper sprayed him and stabbed him through the cheek with her car keys. Good for her. Jeremy was tracked down the next day and dogpiled by SWAT. In his interrogation, he admitted to the abductions of the girls, all 20 of them. Yeah, that's right, 20. There was no way he did all of that. He was literally borderline retarded, and 3 of the 4 girls were taken within walking distance of his apartment. He prayed off to college down the road, but not the college Vivian was taken from. She was taken from a college 40 minutes away. It wouldn't be the first time a serial killer exaggerated their numbers. Once they realized the jig was up, they wanted that Charlie Manson fame. He claimed to have killed a girl every night, would start ranting and preaching when pushed on the details and logistics of his kills. The mayor's office was putting a lot of pressure on the PD to close the case. Jeremy was slowly giving out details on where he hid the bodies. He would eventually get to Vivian, right? My former partner Rob called bullshit on this. He said he was in the interrogation room with a dipshit Fed asking questions. Rob said the Fed led Jeremy into questioning to connect him to Vivian. Of course Jeremy knew of the college Vivian was taken from. He had lived in this town all his life. And that's not the worst of it. There was a voicemail from the night Vivian disappeared. She had called her brother, who was at home waiting on her. She said she was walking to her car and wanted him to stay on the phone with her until she made it. She had said they were following her. She then screamed, "Adam, David, Ed," before the call cut out. You see, Vivian's uncle was a cop back in the day. Adam David Edward is police alphabet for ADE. Vivian was reading off a license plate, just like her cop uncle had taught her, before somebody grabbed her. Jeremy didn't have a car, didn't even have a license. He was an idiot that killed in his own backyard. So needless to say, Vivian's family didn't believe Jeremy was her killer, and there was hope she was still alive. Vivian's uncle wanted to come out of retirement and start kicking down doors looking for her in my city. Of course, Rob caught wind of this and talked him down. He pointed the uncle in my direction, and I took the job at a deep discount. They could pay me in full if I found the girl in one piece. She had been gone for 4 days. I had to work fast. My first stop was the college she went missing from. The useless campus cops were no help to Rob in his investigation, so I talked with the student safety patrol that were the real eyes and ears. A nervous Indian student told me he and his co-workers had been getting more and more calls to escort girls through the parking lot at night. He told me they had called Campus PD on suburban idling across the street at the closed McDonald's. He even saw it 2 nights ago. Campus PD told Safety Patrol it wasn't against the law to sit in the parking lot at a McDonald's, and technically the McDonald's wasn't even in their jurisdiction. Useless. I had no further lead. I doubted the Mickey D's had cameras. So I did what all great PIs do. I went on a stakeout at the campus parking lot. My Indian friend agreed to keep it a secret when I showed him my credentials and slipped him $100 for 2 nights. As I sat in my darked-out car with the engine off and windows cracked, I fought boredom and the urge to not drink my soda. Too much would make me need to piss and blow my cover. Maybe another 20 and Avi would let me sneak into a building and handle my business. I'm not a dirty old man, but I can admire a gorgeous woman when I see one. Also, I was trying to think like the bad guy. So when a curvy redhead parked at the back of the parking lot nearest to the McDonald's across the street, I perked up. I was parked a few rows in front of her, using my rearview mirror to spy on her. I got a better look as she walked by me towards campus. She was on her phone and distracted, hands full of books and purse and keychain. She had driven a little CRV with manual locks. Walking fast and not aware of her surroundings, she passed right by me and never saw me sitting low in my car. Jackpot, I thought. She was easy prey. I hoped her class wasn't too long. If anything, I could watch her and make sure she made it to her car safely when it was over. But that's when I saw movement by her car. Someone was leaning against the passenger side door. I could barely see anything in the rearview mirror, so I quietly opened my door and ducked out between the vehicles. I got a few rows closer to them. I was a big guy, so sneaking was hard on my knees. The guy wore a hoodie and fumbled with the door for a good amount of time. Not a master criminal, I presume. Finally, I heard the door click unlocked. He opened it to unlock the back door, then jumped in to lie down. I could have taken him right when he was at the door, but it would have only been criminal trespass or burglary of a vehicle at most. A lowly Class B. I wanted him dead to rights. I would wait till the redhead returned. Red's class was an hour. The whole time my adrenaline was spiking. I knew what was coming was going to be bad. I could always tell. My arms would feel heavy, and I would get cold inside. My mind would focus to a sharp point. I hadn't started drinking heavily then, but this case pushed me to it. I took a couple swigs of my flask. Finally, Red reappeared, walking and talking on her phone. She sounded and looked tired. As she approached her vehicle, I walked up loudly behind her. I waited for her to unlock the doors with her remote. "Ma'am, excuse me. I'm working with the police. Please hang up your phone and call them right now." I pulled my Army-issue Colt 45 from my jacket, a retirement gift. Had my name on it and everything. Hoped it would only be used for show. The silver gleam of it caused her eyes to widen.
What? What?
She stammered. "Stand back. There's someone in your back seat," I said as I leveled the pistol at the car. She did, and I announced loudly, "Come out, shithead. Let me see your hands." There was a moment of silence. Then the car started rocking and I could hear banging on the door. Red whimpered and ran to hide behind another car. All I heard was,
"Oh, Jesus! Oh, Jesus! Oh, Jesus!"
as she fled. The back door kicked open and I heard a snort and a cough from within. A man sat up and started squirming out feet first. He was draped in shadows, but I could see he was tall and lanky. He stood up to face me. Both his hands had bloody bandages wrapped around them. He pulled back his hood to show me a toothless grin and a pus-filled missing eye. I took a step back in horror. His face was covered with sores and cuts. He was missing a left ear, and he smelled like decay. "Get on the ground now," I commanded. He snorted and spit at me.
"Yes, cat shit. Pervert with purple eyes. I see you. I see you, Mr. Squiggles."
I knew this was meth speak, so I reiterated my position. "I'm not a cop, brother. I'll stack this clip in your face and claim self-defense." He lunged at me. He almost fell to the ground by tripping over himself. My shot rang out and busted the window behind him. He shot back up and grabbed a hold of my weapon with both hands. We both wrestled over it. One of us must have hit the button to eject the mag. It clattered across the ground. Damn, only one round in the chamber now, and he had crazy meth strength.
"The Lord does not die tonight, Squiggles!"
He screamed at me with his rancid hot breath. He was going to kill my out-of-shape ass with my own gun. I angled the gun towards the ground and fired the last shot to ricochet across the asphalt. The slide rocked back to show it was empty. I then released it and our fight was over. The idiot pointed the obviously empty gun in my face and tried to shoot me. I slammed the meth head with a heavy right hook. He flew back to crack his head against the driver's side window. I huffed over to him and flipped him on his stomach, and I sat my fat ass on his ass. He was okay. He was screaming obscenities and made-up Bible verses at me when Campus PD arrived, all rolling up like super cops, screaming and pointing guns at me. They even put me in cuffs. Finally, Rob showed up with the real PD. Campus police asked for help when I mentioned it was connected to an ongoing city case. He had them take me out of the cuff, too. "Rob, this guy knows where Vivian is. Give me a lead and I'll get to her. I can cut through all the red tape," I stammered to him.
"Whoa, slow up. Do you think this guy has a coherent thought in his head?"
Rob asked as the campus cops threatened to tase him in the back seat of the patrol car if he didn't stop trying to kick out the windows. A mixture of his slobber and blood smeared all over the glass from headbutting the window. "Get me a criminal history and a background check. We for sure know he wasn't the brains of the operation. Maybe I can find an accomplice," I answered. Rob shook the idea around in his head.
"Sounds good. You were always a crap magnet on my shift. Let's hope it helps you find these turds."
"Right," I said. "Keep me in the loop. I'm going to run home and wash this stink off me." I turned to leave. Rob coughed.
"Hey, you forgetting something?"
he said, pointing his finger at my gun.
"You discharged 2 rounds at the scene of an attempted kidnapping."
I slumped my shoulders and leaned in close. "Come on, Rob. These guys overlooked taking it from me. Besides, I may need it soon if you get me that hot tip." Rob gave me a look like a disapproving parent to his child, even though I had 4 years on them. I don't know. I told Campus PD I'd be in tomorrow to give them a witness statement. I'll return it then. All right, you better. Don't get one of these rookies in trouble by taking advantage of their lack of knowledge. We were there once too, Rob chastised. All right, boss man, I'll play nice. Just run his background quick, I said, giving him a wave as I left. I had gotten home and taken a shower. I tried to abstain from the drink, but my knees were barking and waiting around made me nervous. 5 tramadol and a shot of the good vodka I kept in my freezer made me right. Back in those days, I used the excuse that I needed it to be on top of my game to keep me alive in the field. So what if I was a little intoxicated? Being in pain was worse, right? My phone rang around midnight. It was Rob.
William Kent Smith, age 28, used to be a janitor at the old St. Emily's. Been on the street since it closed. But it gets better. He owns a 94 model Suburban with license plate ADE 5076.
This is our guy, or at least the driver of the vehicle used in the abduction, I said back, already grabbing my keys and coat. Where do you need me? What's his address?
We're executing a search warrant in the morning. I've already sent a uni by his house. No Suburban. I need you to check the hospital. We know he wasn't the brains, so she may be stashed off-site.
Rob paused.
And he had keys. Tons of them on the big keychain. Not enough for probable cause, but enough for reasonable freaking suspicion.
I considered carefully. It made sense. He may still have old keys to the place he used to work, and it would be hard to get a search warrant for an entire hospital without further evidence. I needed to get in there fast. Vivian was on a ticking clock. It was almost like old times working homicide with Rob again. When I pulled up on St. Emily's, it was almost 1 a.m. The 8-story tall block building loomed like a dark giant in the sky. It dominated the skyline over the short buildings around it. Most were relocated private practice doctors' offices and unused parking garages, so it was quiet and empty. I pulled up to the new chain-link fence and padlock. I snapped the padlock with some trusty bolt cutters, an essential tool for PIs. I'd take the criminal trespass charge if it meant saving the girl. All the entrances were chained shut. I found the low window already partially shattered. I cleared the rest of the glass out with my giant mag light, and in I went into the administrative wing. I had no idea where to begin my search. Hopefully my bad luck would put me in the path of the bad guys, so I made my way into the stairwell. At least I could find a sign indicating what floor was what. Once I entered the dark stairwell, I did find a dusty map mounted to the wall. I brushed off the dust and lit it up with my flashlight. If I was a bad guy, I would take the victim somewhere they couldn't be heard and couldn't escape. A basement, maybe? The hospital had 2 of them. My heart almost gave out as I heard a banshee scream echoing down the stairwell from far above. The yell bounced off the walls, making it seem like a choir of copycats. I couldn't make it out to be male or female. It was just loud, shrill, and in pain. I guess the bad guys chose the top floor. I looked at the map to see the top floor was the pediatric wing. Great. What's the deal with sickos and children? As I made my way up the stairs, I took care to pace myself. What good would I be if I had no energy to face whoever it was up there? As I reached the 6th floor, I turned on my flashlight sporadically, not wanting to catch the attention of anybody that could be somewhere in the stairway with me. As my light revealed my ascent to the top, it also chronicled a descent into madness. The walls are now covered with your standard curse words, pentagrams, and phallic imagery. But more and more I see a badly drawn stick man with 2 purple dots for eyes, over and over. Some of chalk, most drawn with runny spray paint by unsteady hands. but all have the telltale purple dots for eyes. By the time I was halfway between the 7th and 8th floor, the walls were covered with the wavy lines of the stickman. They stacked on top of each other like an army or a silent crowd watching my climb. Another set of words ran together underneath the stickmen in an uneven hand. Mr. Squiggles, Mr. Squiggles, Mr. Squiggles, over and over. He wants pain, he wants sweets, he wants pain, he wants meat. It ran on and on, all over the stairs, the tops and bottoms, at hard-to-reach angles. I kept my light off as I reached the platform for the 8th floor. Moonlight poured in from the windows, and the orange flicker of propane lanterns dotted further down the hallway. I slowly made my way down the hallway. I had to make my way past too many open doors as I approached the nurse's station. I could imagine another meth head or freak charging from the dark open mouths of these rooms at any instant. Cartoon paintings of happy children, animals, and airplanes decorated the walls. The creepy factor was off the charts, and the grip on my gun was getting sweaty from the strain I was putting on it. The nurse's station had a glowing lamp atop it, and I made the corner to see a man sitting on the floor with his back slumped against the counter. I approached the man to see, I kid you not, a power drill sticking into his head. Fresh blood leaked out of the wound. At least I solved the mystery of who was screaming earlier. He had blood-matted dreadlocks and dirty nurse's scrubs. Both his ears were missing, fingers too. I had seen this before with Meth Head Will in the parking lot. He had a lanyard around his neck. As I bent down to retrieve it, his eyes popped open and he grabbed my hand.
Who are you?
He said in a sing-song voice. I put my pistol in his face and was about to threaten him before his hand dropped, and he went back to being quiet and dead. My fear froze me. I was sure he was dead before I got to him. He had the unnatural stillness of a corpse, something I've seen many times. How does a man look you right in the eye and question you with a sparkle in his own, and just flip back to being dead? My reverie was broken by a frantic male voice further down the hallway.
I killed the nurse, and Will hasn't come back with anyone new for you. It's over. Just let me kill the girl and then kill myself. She's had enough.
I quickly ducked behind the nurse's desk. I peeked over to see a tall, shirtless, pale man walking down the hallway, hands on his head and pacing back and forth.
I don't want to keep this girl alive. Let me finish her. Enough with your sick games.
The man argued to no one. She's still alive. She has to be here. I snuck out from behind the desk and quickly approached the man while his back was turned. He quickly turned to face me as I was upon him. I bashed him right in the forehead with the butt of my pistol. He dropped to his knees and I held him tight by the neck.
Where is the girl?
I screamed. Now facing me, I got a good look at his ugly mug. His eyes were bloodshot and infected from tiny cuts under his eyes. His cheek on the right side of his mouth was hanging off like a piece of ham, showing a skeletal smile underneath. If they did this to themselves, then what did they do to the girl? I pushed the barrel of the gun in his cheek wound. He screamed. I screamed back.
Vivian Straub, where the hell is she? I'll pick you apart until you answer me.
I fired 2 shots above him and placed a hot barrel on his temple. This made the tweaker mad. With an unnatural strength, he stood up and picked me up by the throat with one arm. His offhand slapped my pistol out of my hand to crash somewhere behind me. My back was slammed against the corner of the high counter of the desk, and the disfigured man leaned in to look at me. I struggled to push him off with no effect. He pulled a rusty scalpel out of his pocket and began inching it closer and closer to my eye. a half smile forming on the undamaged side of his face. The scalpel was only an inch away from my eye before he blinked at me and stopped. He released me to grab the chain from around my neck, pulling out my shiny PI badge.
Are you a cop?
He asked in a small voice, holding the badge out like a pendulum before his eyes. Yeah, for years. Backup is coming. You should run while you can, I persuaded. He looked back at me.
I was a cop once. A deputy,
he said sadly before letting out a growl and gritting his teeth, like he was fighting something.
Room 824!
He blurted out at me before running the scalpel across his neck, blood gushing quickly. He released me and fell back to the wall, quickly sliding down and dying. I stared at him for only a moment, glad for the mercy. Room 824 was urgent on my mind. I found the room quickly, knocking the door open and stepping inside. On the gurney was a small female handcuffed to the railing. Her face was covered completely in bloody bandages.
Vivian!
I shouted. She stirred and began screaming, believing me to be one of the psychos that abducted her. I hurried to her and prayed the cuffs took a police-issue key. They did, and I picked her frail body up. She screamed and swatted at me. I told her I'm with her family as I rushed her down the stairs. Her hands were bandaged up, too, and she's bleeding from somewhere. I got her outside, about to have a heart attack as I fumbled to call 911. When EMS arrived, they had to give me oxygen, too. Rob showed up with half a dozen unis and ran straight to the back of the ambulance where I sat.
You got her back! You got her back, you beautiful bastard!
He cheered. Out of all the dead girls he had seen in the past months, every victory was precious. I reached out weakly to give him a knuckle bump. Hours later at the real hospital, I sat in the waiting room. Bryan came out to catch me up on the story he had pieced together so far.
She's stable, but they did a number on her. Cut her face up, pulled nails, cut off segments of her fingers.
He let out a very world-weary sigh.
They cut off her tongue to keep her quiet, but it didn't. You known that. It just kept her from begging.
I wonder what kind of sadist doesn't like begging from their victim. She'll never be the same, I said while looking down at my lap.
The guy you sat on at the campus fessed up to the three of them grabbing her. He said he was looking for a new victim to keep Mr. Squiggles from eating them,
Rob said with a question on his face. I sat there thinking over the crazy night, wanting to know more. I wanted to go back and poke around before CSI cleaned up. I had an idea.
Shoot, Rob, I dropped my gun.
He looked at me like, so what?
I shot it off and put it in the suspect's mouth,
I whispered.
It'll raise questions on the ethics I used during my investigation when CSI finds it. Also, think of the poor campus cop who didn't take it from me when he should have. Oh, God. All right,
Rob said as he fished a key out of his pocket.
The company that owns the building gave me a key.
He held it out.
Don't keep it.
Early morning around 5 a.m., I roll up to the abandoned hospital. Another 3 tramadol, BC powder, and a Red Bull. I hadn't graduated to Vicodin yet, but you see the progression. This time I walked in the front door. A giant white display faced me. Used to be the welcome and information sign, now blank. When I got upstairs, CSI had already taped it off and removed the bodies. New shift must be coming on in an hour. They had a patrol vehicle stationed outside. Rob told him to let me in to take pictures for my own report. I quickly located my shiny pistol. It had fallen right in a wastebasket. CSI for sure would have found it today. I snooped around a little, only finding food wrappers and plastic sacks filled with human waste. They must have been living here for months. I walked into one room to see 2 electric lanterns still on, low and losing battery. On the wall, a tapestry of cartoon animals and smiling doctors and nurses. In the middle was the biggest drawing of the squiggly stick figure with purple dots for eyes, about 6 feet tall. Bloody handprints smeared around it to form a macabre halo. Laying on the floor around it were all sorts of bloody tools and knives. I saw a Bible with a bloody knife through it, its pages stuck together with something awful. As I bent down to look at it, I saw a motion in the corner of my eye, where the squiggle man stood. How do I describe it? It was like when a character in a video game glitches into an object, or a spider convulsing its legs before it dies. It was only for an instant, but the stick man spasmed and twitched violently. When my head jerked back up, it was still, back where it should have been. But I swear the 2 dots were further down on its head, looking down at me. That was enough for me. I'd been up for over 20 hours. I had all sorts of chemicals in my system, and I had witnessed some traumatic crap that probably will give me nightmares for years. I needed to go home. I made the trek back down the stairs and through the main lobby. I came to the front door and stopped to fish out the key from my pocket. That's when I heard it, the voice that has haunted my dreams for the past 5 years. It was as if a professional voice actor was doing a Mickey Mouse impersonation, but more shrill and filled with malevolence, or the voice of the clown from the new Stephen King movie, but with more pitch and a teasing sing-song voice.
Who are you?
I spun with my gun out. The voice pulled at something deep in my monkey brain. It told me I was in the presence of a predator. I saw nobody anywhere in the dark, but one thing did immediately catch my eye. On the giant wide display was a large drawing of a squiggly stick figure with 2 purple eyes. It was around 5 feet tall and had one hand up, as if waving goodbye. Well, I got the hell out of there. I swore to myself I would never be back. Whatever was haunting this hospital was outside the all-seeing view of God. It felt cold and evil. I just somehow knew. But now, 5 years later, almost to the day, I'm back. And I know it's up there, waiting for me to come in. Like the wolf tempting Red Riding Hood to put her head in its mouth. It's waiting for me to finish what we started. The events from 5 years ago were life-changing to me, and especially young Vivian. It took her weeks to recover physically, and she never quite recovered mentally. The creeps had cut off segments of 4 of her fingers, 2 on each hand. They had stabbed her in a non-fatal spot in the belly and let it get infected. They burned her body with cigarettes and used a blowtorch on her left foot. Worst of all, they cut out her tongue. It was some sort of game for them. One of them, Julian Arno, used his knowledge as a nurse to keep her from dying. He also used drugs to keep her from passing out from the pain, some sort of mixture of adrenaline and cocaine. Parking Lot Will had indeed been on the lookout for a new victim when I caught him. Another sacrifice for Mr. Squiggles, a thing they all worshipped vehemently. And last of all was Carter Regals. He was the ringleader of the group. Through investigation, I found out Carter used to work for the local PD back in the day. He started as a dispatcher before making the jump to patrol. Seems he was a deputy somewhere in East Texas before all of that. I found FTOs and officers who had worked with Carter. All reports say he was a good cop, but he was jumpy and refused to work night shift. He only made it 2 years before resigning for personal issues. Somewhere in the 2 years, he worked an extra job at St. Emily's when it was operational. Before that, Carter was a deputy in East Texas. I tracked down an ex-girlfriend who said he quit after saving a girl from being killed in the woods one night. The woman was left in a vegetative state for a while, and Carter developed an unnatural fear of the dark. He would complain of nightmares of monsters with purple eyes. Sounds familiar. So we got a nurse, a janitor, and a cop who all worked at the same hospital at the same time. I would love to know where and how they bonded in their shared lunacy, or how Mr. Squiggles infected them all. I could go ask old parking lot Will, but he killed himself in his cell shortly after being arrested. Used a shiv to harry-carry himself like a dishonored samurai. Hell of a painful way to go. I'm glad he chose that method. Vivian went on to actually regain some semblance of life. Heavy sessions of physical therapy and mental therapy helped. She had a great support system with her parents, new kid sister, friends, and me. I visited Vivian 3 times a week at first. Now it's at least twice a month. I became a close friend of the family. You see, I was changed too that night. My soul had been bonded with Vivian's, or our fates intertwined. I made sure my presence wasn't detrimental to her frail psyche. I asked her therapist if I would only re-victimize her by just visiting, but the therapist told me it was good for me to be by Vivian's side as long as I showed great interest in her life before the incident. I was a new friend made on the worst day of her life. I pushed her to remember her life before the incident, before she was shattered. I learned sign language for her, learned about indie rock and the fundamentals of drawing to learn with her. I even sat down to watch Full Metal Alchemist and even learned its difference from Brotherhood. Truth was, I was closer to Vivian than my actual daughter. Me and my daughter were good now, but I was a bad father to her in her teenage years. Maybe this was my penance for being a terrible dad. It took Viv 2 years to open up to anybody. Countless surgeries, therapy sessions, and skin grafts later. And when she did, I understood why she never wanted to speak of any of it. She spoke of the torture for 5 days, being roughly put back together by the nurse just to be cut open again. She spoke of the maniac screaming and ranting. All 3 of them constantly did, talking to Mr. Squiggles. Even stranger, she spoke of the ex-deputy, Carter. He would show moments of kindness and lucidity, giving her water, giving her pain medicine, always to be punished by hurting himself and apologizing to Mr. Squiggles. Vivian said Carter refused to let the other 2 hurt her anymore on the 4th day. Instead, they began hurting each other, cutting off their fingers and ears, anything to appease Mr. Squiggles. Janitor Will said he had had enough and was going to get a new victim for Mr. Squiggles to sate his wrath. Of course, you know how I caught him in his attempt. After Will left, Carter killed the nurse, Julian. Carter's plan was to let Vivian die so she wouldn't have to suffer anymore. I like to think when I showed up, he had a change of heart and saw she could be rescued. That's why he fought Mr. Squiggles and killed himself. Yes, I fully believe in the monster. Of course, I don't tell Vivian. To her, it was just shared psychosis brought on by drug abuse between her captors. Carter was like a mini cult leader feeding their drug-addled brains tales of the boogeyman. But I know what I heard and saw that night. Something evil occupied the shadows of St. Emily's, and I would have been fine with leaving the demon there to never be thought of again. But Vivian started having nightmares. Nightmares of a dark figure with purple eyes. She said it spoke to her, told her to hurt herself and others. She believed it was a manifestation of her trauma, but I knew better, and the voice was only getting stronger. Internet searches on paranormal figures are a crapshoot. With so many creepypastas trying to come across as real, it's hard to separate fantasy from fiction. I had to track down an actual practitioner of black magic, not some Zach Baggins cable show ghost expert. Enter Madame Monroe of New Orleans. Made contact with her by email and vetted her with some of my NOLA cop buddies. She was legit, scary legit. Even the cops knew to show Madame Monroe respect in her neighborhood. I had to drop $1,000 just to see her, but what she told me was worth every penny. I ducked into a voodoo tourist trap off a side road from Bourbon Street. It was a store meant to trick the tourists into believing they had found a legit voodoo shop. I gave a passcode to the clerk and he led me out the back, through turns in an alley, and up the side stairs of a brick building. Inside the building was a spacious studio apartment, white marble floor, black leather furniture, and a giant flat screen and entertainment system. The air was a chilly 60 degrees in contrast to the high 90s outside. I was left alone for only a second when Madame Monroe walked in from a back room. She was a statuesque black woman with a soft red velvet dress, many necklaces, and long shiny braids pulled back into a long ponytail to hang to her lower back. She motioned to 2 tall-backed black chairs facing one another for me to sit. Once we had, I thanked her for the meeting. She just stared at me with her piercing brown eyes, just enough crow's feet to make her look slightly cruel. Finally, she barked out a laugh.
Ha! You didn't expect digs like this, did you? Maybe you expected a shack by the bayou with chicken bones for wind chimes.
No, ma'am, I didn't, I replied.
Oh, hush there. You call me Matilda. We're partners in this here mystery,
she said with a hint of Cajun accent flavored in her purring voice.
To tell you the truth, I was thinking of scamming an out-of-town ex-cop like you. But then, you mentioned purple eyes.
She pulled out a Swisher Sweet from her small handbag and lit it.
Now, we must work together.
A strong scent of marijuana hit me, the good stuff. I laughed and said, I'm glad I've earned your attention. Also, my cop days are long behind me. I held out my hand to partake from her smoke. Matilda raised an eyebrow, amused. She handed me the joint and spoke.
Yes, I see a lot of darkness in you now. But I also see a light that refuses to give up. What's her name?
Matilda snapped in the air, as if trying to conjure a memory.
Your honey child. Vivian, that's it.
Silky lines of smoke ran circles between us as I handed the joint back. I never told her Vivian's name, but I still wasn't sure I was being scammed.
Purple eyes,
she said, taking a deep drag and almost finishing it.
I know of this one, and it's not pretty.
She dropped the bud on the white immaculate floor and gave me a solemn stare.
The devil isn't in hell, you know. Yeah, he roams to and fro, seeking who he may devour. He and his fallen angels will only be thrown to hell on the day of judgment.
She tilted her head on the quizzical nature.
So if the devil isn't down there punishing sinners with a pitchfork, then who is, Cher?
Purple eyes, I stated as a half question.
Yes, it is a thing of hell, a torturer, a weapon. It has no conscience or reasoning on why it does what it does. Its base drive is to punish, to inflict pain. It's as if a piece of hell itself exists on this material plane.
Great, an uber demon, I smirked. I thought I would just throw some holy water at it and be done with it. Matilda didn't share in my humor. Her stone-cold stare only hardened. The weed was doing nothing on lightening her mood.
It is a devourer of demons. It is a thing demons and angels fear. It's used as a warning to show angels what the price of disobedience will get them. Yes, although created by God, it is not a thing of God. It is a thing made separate, a thing unseen by his all-seeing eye.
So, how do I stop it, or exorcise it, or whatever? It's still hurting Vivian. It's changing her. I spoke with exasperation. This was all too much. Somehow I knew what Matilda was saying was gospel. I had felt as much when I was in the hospital that night.
My familiar tells me of a story about purple eyes. A story even legend among beings of the higher and lower planes. A brash, arrogant angel summoned Purple Eyes from the depths to take revenge on a treacherous demon. But Purple Eyes has no master and does not recognize the difference between angel and demon. It only knows to punish. So it absorbed the arrogant angel and went on to absorb many other spiritual entities.
So it can eat ghosts? I said, trying to keep my mind open. If she was making it up, then she was a great storyteller.
It is a prison for all things spiritual. It takes on the traits and knowledge of those it absorbs,
Matilda warned.
It is most attracted to innocence and free will sacrifice. Those things are non-existent in the void of hell.
I left Madame Monroe's another $3,000 louder. She swore to me she would find a weakness or spell to use against the torturer of hell. I would have gladly dropped more money if it increased my chance of saving Vivian. She was falling deeper into its thrall. On one of my frequent visits, I was sitting across from her drawing in my pad while she drew in hers and listening to Death Cab for Cutie. She tapped her pad with a pencil to get my attention to look up. She held up her picture, and I let out a verbal groan. I had told her not to dwell on her nightmares, to tell her psychiatrist, but she only shared them with me. It was another beautifully drawn picture of something terrible, depicted in her slightly anime-inspired caricature of a horrible event with Purple Eyes as the main focus. This one showed a small boy with a bald head, eyes closed and crying as a black shadow loomed over him, its purple eyes blazing. "Why do you show me these?" I signed to her. Her beautiful face was sullen. The plastic surgeon had done wonders on her, but you could still see shallow veins of scarring. "It won't stop bugging me till I show you," she signed back. "I think it wants you to know." "You can't listen to it, Vivian," I said aloud, causing birds feeding in the backyard to take flight. We were sitting on the back porch of her parents' house during a beautiful sunny day. Now all that was ruined. Vivian gave me a dour look and signed indignantly. "It's part of my process. It's part of my recovery." But I knew it wasn't. She believed Purple Eyes is a figment of the angst and torment on her mind. But I knew the truth. Her first pictures were of a human figure of pure light with brilliant magenta-colored eyes being swallowed by a wave of darkness. The angel from the legend. The angel of light had an expression of pure agony on its face. Then she drew a follow-up picture of the shadow, now formed like a man with its signature purple eyes. Then there were the pictures of her kidnappers. One of the cops standing in the rain across from a man as a woman hung from a tree between them. Another of a nurse with dreadlocks cutting his face as the shadow loomed over him. And last of the three, a picture of a janitor praying in a maintenance closet with 2 purple lights at the makeshift altar. I knew these were scenes of the torturer's life. It was showing them to Vivian, who would show them to me. It was taunting me. And the latest picture, I knew what it was about. It was the torturer's first meeting with Mr. Squiggles. I had been thorough in my investigation after the incident all those years ago. I tracked down a retired nurse who used to work on the 8th floor pediatric wing. Kiki Rollins worked 15 years at the old St. Emily's on the 8th floor. On the pretense of collecting ghost stories for a novel, she divulged to me the rumors around pediatrics' resident-friendly ghost, Mr. Squiggles. Kiki told me that Mr. Squiggles' story had been around since before she worked there. Children would tell about dreams of a bald-headed kid standing beside their bed at night. The boy would always show the patient a picture of stick figure people on a page. "That's you and me," the kid would say, pointing to the stick man. "I'm Mr. Squiggles and you are Mrs. Squiggles," the boy would laugh. Kiki said the children would always have this vision days before passing. It was always a comforting dream. Things among the nurses would go missing or be misplaced. It was always blamed on the antics of Mr. Squiggles. He was just part of the job, another thing to accept during this nurse's day-to-day routine. But then Mr. Squiggles changed. Around the same time Carter Regals began working extra jobs on the 1st floor. Children had nightmares of Mr. Squiggles. He would pull at them and tell them only hell awaited them. The mortality rate on the floor went up 40% in the 4 months before the hospital closed. Kiki said nurses didn't feel good walking into rooms with the lights off. It always felt like something was waiting to pounce out and hurt them. So that's how I knew the pictures Vivian drew were messages from Purple Eyes / Mr. Squiggles. I could deal with the spooky taunting if I didn't see the changing in Vivian. Her kid sister Victoria, born a year after the incident, was the sweetest 4-year-old in the world. Vivian doted over her and pampered her with affection. She was an anchor to the innocent and good side of the world, but I had witnessed Vivian lash out in anger and slap her sister just days before. But now I must bring everything back to the present. The reason I'm back at this damned hospital. 2 days ago, Vivian had disappeared from her home. Victoria was gone with her. She had left behind a single drawing on Victoria's bed. It was a picture of me. I wore a face of confusion and surprise. Behind me stood the stick figure with purple eyes. A word balloon came from its mouth. "Who are you?" it asked. I knew it was a call-out from Mr. Squiggles. That's why I was on my way to the 8th floor again. Vivian would be there, and hopefully Victoria was still in one piece. I wasn't even halfway up the stairwell when I encountered the creepy stick drawings plastered all over the walls. They had stretched further down the stairwell than the last time, like a cancer on the building. But mixed in with the new drawings of Purple Eyes was a fat stick figure. It was drawn with a giant circle for a body, with a little head and limbs sticking out, a yellow star in the middle of its chest. One picture had the fat man holding a tiny square with RX written on it. Another had the man hanging from a noose. Another standing with a gun to his head. I seriously wondered who the stick figure could be. I wasn't that fat. When I finally reached the 8th floor, I was hit with a terrible smell. It was like bad breath being blown in my face. It was so thick I could taste it. I gagged and had to get a hold of myself from spewing down the stairwell. The doorway to the floor was pitch black inside. No moonlight like last time. As I got closer, I realized there was an unnatural wall of darkness blocking the doorway. I stopped and considered my options. I didn't want to step into the fog, but I had to get to Vivian and Victoria. I remembered the picture of the angel of light being swallowed up by the darkness. Wouldn't I be essentially just feeding myself to this monster? As if sensing my doubt, a scream echoed from within the black curtain. A female scream. A child's scream. "Victoria! Vivian!" I shouted as I stepped closer to the threshold of the door. My mind was made up for me when a strong hand shot out of the gloom to grab my jacket. It pulled me into the thick darkness. For a moment, all I could see was nothing but the void. Then, in an instant, a fully lit, clean hospital hallway jumped into view around me. I could hear the phone ringing from the nurse's station and muffled sounds coming from the PA. I listened harder to make out what was being said.
All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
It repeated over and over. I continued down the hallway, and just like that last time, all the doors were open. Each door I passed, I could see pale children staring at me with sadness in their eyes, or curled up on the floor crying to themselves, or screaming into the sky. How many children had he taken? I was approaching the nurse's station when my surroundings changed again. I was standing in knee-deep water with a circle of trees around me. In front of me, a one-eyed man hung from a rope tied to a tree sprouting out of the water. As I walked closer, he spoke to me.
He lies. You can't deal with him. He will take and take. He will burn your soul out of you.
The hanging man croaked, swinging gently.
He lies. He will take and take.
The hangman repeated like a mantra. I guess Purple Eyes wanted a scene transition because I was suddenly sucked deep into the water. Down I went into the endless depths. All the air escaped my chest as I saw my bubbles racing away from me. The mouthful of water tasted sour and burned my throat. I coughed it back out only to suck in more through my nose to scorch my brain. I knew I was going to die. I had let Purple Eyes literally get into my body. But the worst thought was I didn't think I'd die normally. Instead, I knew my soul would be locked away as the monster used my body as a puppet to hurt people. I thought of poor Vivian, a girl who was once a veterinarian's assistant and wanted to make the jump to helping people as a nurse. She had kindness and healing in her heart, all torn out of her for the past 5 years. Just as she was getting some semblance of hope back, the bastard took her again. And poor Victoria, just a child. And Purple Eyes was going to have her loving older sister commit sororicide on her. A righteous anger filled me as I drowned in the burning water. My anger only grew as I choked, and with a thud and a wet splash, I fell to hit a stone floor with water splashing all around me. I coughed and looked around frantically. All I saw were stone walls and a large metal door in front of me. The door was at least 40 feet high and 20 across, covered with strange runes and symbols. I stood up and stared in wonder at it.
I can help you escape, even with the symbol you have carved on your chest.
Came a booming voice. It was loud but somehow comforting, like the voice of James Earl Jones or Michael Clark Duncan.
I used the last of my power for you to run.
I don't want to escape, I said with fear in my voice. I have to find someone.
The girls?
Asked the deep voice. There was a hint of amusement in his tone. In my head, I saw a vision of a giant man sitting in the shadows on the other side of the door. His head was down and millions of feathers drifted lazily around him to cover the floor. I felt a deep sorrow coming from him, and a deep embarrassment.
"No greater love,"
spoke the voice. The figure in my mind lifted his head and his eyes burned a brilliant magenta. The whole room around me was blinded with the growing light coming through the door. A warm feeling passed over my body. The world switched again. I was back in the hospital for real this time. I was still run down and dirty, with moonlight coming through the windows. I knew this was real, like how you know the difference between a vivid dream and actually waking up. I had been freed, but there was no turning back for me now. I was heading straight for the room with the collage on the walls and the giant Mr. Squiggles picture. I heard a child screaming on the way, and I began to sprint.
"Sister, stop! Please stop!"
Vivian screamed. I turned the corner into the room to see Victoria's little body taped to a metal folding chair, her feet dangling. Vivian stood over her, cutting her cheek with a scalpel.
"Vivian, stop!"
I screamed. She turned to look at me and gave a big grin. She straightened and held the knife down by her sister's vulnerable throat. I had my gun in my holster under my jacket, but I didn't intend on shooting anybody. I reached to my back and pulled out a small tranquilizer pistol. It had cost me a pretty penny, but money wasn't an issue for me. I only had 2 shots. I would have to draw fast and hit her in the neck for it to take effect quickly. In my pocket was a string necklace with a charm bag on it. Madame Monroe had prepared it for me. It should cause an invading spirit to leave the body. I would put it on her after I hit her with the trink dart. I just hoped it was strong enough hoodoo to work on this creature. As I was pulling the trink gun from my back, I felt an explosion hit me in the side of my face. The trink gun clattered to the ground as I spun around, dazed, to see a man swing and hit me again. My vision went black for a second, and when it returned, another punch hit me. I should have known Purple Eyes would recruit another junkie from Muscle. I had been a boxer back in college, and I knew the telltale signs my ass was about to be KO'd, so I ducked under another punch to come up with a 1-2 combination of my own. It stumbled my attacker back enough to get a good look at him. It was Rob, my old partner. My heart sank as I saw the circles under his bulging eyes, and face caked with dirt. How long had he been under its control? Why hadn't I kept better touch with my old friend? He must have spent hours at this cursed crime scene, and more talking to parking lot Will. Plenty of time for the torturer to get his hooks in him. I couldn't see him like this. I had to help him. He stunned me with another punch. He was taller than me and had a good reach. I took the next punch like a champ to get in close to him and grab him by the neck. He started hammering me in my stomach as I pulled my spare trink dart out of my jacket pocket. I stabbed it into his neck and at first thought it had no effect on him. The blows kept coming into my abdomen, making my knees begin to buckle. Finally, he slowed and fell to his knees. I left him dazed and rocking as I went to retrieve my trink gun. When I turned around, I expected to see him on the ground, but he was stubbornly getting to his feet. He reaches into his own dirty coat to produce a black pistol. On instinct, I quickly pointed the pistol and shot Rob right in the solar plex with the dart. He grunted and continued to try to level the Glock at me, but his arm shook like the gun weighed 100 pounds. I quick-stepped forward and pushed him with both hands, and he went sprawling backwards to hit the wall, sliding down unconscious. I ran over to Rob and bent to check on him, first grabbing his gun and tossing it into the hallway. His eyes fluttered and he moaned like he was trying to wake up. "Damn it," I said as I dug in my pocket to pull out the charm necklace. I was down both my darts and was about to use my trump card, but I couldn't let this thing have my old friend. I slipped the necklace over his head and he let out a gasp of pain. He began gritting his teeth as black smoke leaked from between his teeth and nostrils. The dark smoke gathered in the air before shooting towards Vivian to go into her mouth and nose.
Now you watch,
Vivian said in a terrible voice. I knew her being able to speak was impossible. The Mr. Squiggles drawing behind her began its twitching dance on the wall. She brought the blade back to Victoria's terrified face. I tried to move forward, but my body wouldn't listen. I was frozen somehow. My mind raced as I tried to come up with a plan. I may have been lying when I said the necklace was my trump card. I had another plan, a last-ditch effort. I prayed to God to not have to use it, but I was always a sore loser.
Take me instead,
I shouted. And just as I hoped, Vivian stopped and looked at me.
You are fat and useless, filled with hate and mistakes. But she is sweet. We both are sweet,
said the puppeteering Vivian.
Then let one go and take me,
I pleaded. I had already figured even a torture monster from hell still wouldn't want to be me, so I had to sweeten the bait for it to bite.
What would hurt Vivian more? Me trading my life for her or her sister? Using me to kill one of them?
I screamed in desperation.
Whoever is spared will live with the pain all their life. It will punish them every day. You would let me use you to kill one of the girls?
The thing asked through Vivian.
Yes,
I said, my face in a mask of sadness.
At least one will survive. I can't lose them both.
Vivian straightened and gave me a hungry look.
Then say it. Say you want me. I stand at the door and knock. Accept me into your heart.
I gave a sigh of relief. Hopefully Purple Eyes thought it was a sigh of exasperation. I said the words.
I welcome you into my heart. Take me instead.
An ashen wave of black smoke shot out from her face into mine. It felt like I was drowning in the burning water again. It continued to burn down my throat and into my lungs, reaching every part of me. Once it finally stopped, I felt pain screaming in every part of my body. It was an onslaught of maddening sensations. I tossed back and forth like an animal caught in a snare.
It only stops if you hurt them,
said a voice in my head, but it was twisted and sickly. Through a purple blur in my vision, I saw Vivian's face. She was terrified and confused. She looked down at her taped-up sister and bent over to start ripping her free. You better be worth all the money, Madam Monroe, I thought, as I took a menacing step towards Vivian. I had wired another $5,000 to her before showing up tonight. She should be in a dark room at this moment performing her own counterspell.
The powder, Cher, the powder,
came her voice in my head. My hand went to the PI badge hanging around my neck. I pulled it out before me. A small vial filled with white powder was next to my dangling badge. I felt a sense of confusion come from the monster as I popped its cork and held it to my nose. You see, I had 5 years to plan for this showdown. I had gone to great lengths to learn about my enemy and how to protect the people I love. The powder I was about to snort was a special mixture of Monroe's. It was supposed to give me control back temporarily. I threw my head back and sniffed the whole vial through my nose. Oh boy, let's just say I found out cocaine was the main ingredient. It felt like fireworks were going off through my body, and my mind felt like a red-hot knife.
Stay away, Vivian,
I demanded as I marched away from her, but I couldn't help it. I turned to look at both of them.
Forgive your sister, Victoria. She didn't mean to hurt you. And take care of Rob.
I began to tear up as I looked into Vivian's scarred, beautiful face.
I love you, Viv,
I said quickly. With that, I turned and stormed off. I could hear Vivian crying after me. I was making it towards one of the rooms with a huge window. I pulled my gun out of my jacket and started to point it at my head.
No!
I felt the torturer's voice yell in my mind. It sounded like it was far away, but it still had the strength to make me throw my head away and to the side.
Check, you purple bastard,
I said as I angled my arm to point at the window. I shot the whole mag into the glass, shattering the window completely. I dropped the useless pistol and began marching toward the open window, taking big, heavy steps. Purple eyes fought me tooth and nail the whole way. When I got about 5 feet from the window, I felt the monster's panic. It started taking a different approach.
I'll just go back to the girl. All of you will still die tonight,
it said in rage. There was a moment of calm as I felt Purple Eyes let go of me. Then his presence came back with a feeling of absolute confusion.
Checkmate,
I said as I ripped open my button-up shirt. Carved on my chest was a bloody sealing and binding rune, specially designed by the powerful madam. The bastard wasn't going anywhere. He was staying in this hunk of sentient meat the whole way down.
I will kill her. I will punish the whole family. I will punish all of you. Only hell and torment await you in the end.
I stood at the window and looked down. Madame Monroe said the monster would be bound to my corpse until the body was ash. He would be out of the game for a good number of decades. Enough time for the girls to heal and have a happy life. I stepped off the edge and felt the wind racing across my face. The monster screamed within me. Pretty good for a lowly burnt-out PI against an angel-killing psycho spirit. I smiled and thought, let's go to hell together, you bastard.
Chilling tales for dark nights.